Chapter 1013. As the telephones were gradually installed in the residences of the warlords of the Yun nation, the originally vague veil over this new thing was finally lifted. There was no limit to the distance. They could talk at any time from hundreds of kilometers to thousands of kilometers away. They could clearly hear the other party's voice. The two warlords could even use it to chat about their daily lives. There was no need for the various departments to send people for anything. They only needed to make a phone call. Soon, everything about telephones swept through the entire Yun nation like a storm. Whether it was on the streets or in the alleys, in the brothels or restaurants, people were discussing telephones. Coupled with the advertisement, "Make a phone call if you miss home," it was in the limelight for a while. Renbachian's reputation also rose, and the name Tiangong quickly replaced the original names, Poison Warrior and Stinky King. Renbachian was happy to see this because he finally didn't have to carry those two names on his back anymore. The name Poison Warrior was fine, but the name Stinky King would occasionally reach his ears through the rearguard commandery, making him feel inexplicably sad every time. It was as if he had become a stink bug crossing the street. What followed was a large number of orders from the people. In particular, the families and chambers of commerce didn't have a problem with the high installation cost and monthly rent of the telephones. The benefits of timely communication were innumerable. In just half a month, more than 40 royal communication stores throughout the Yun nation received more than 7,000 orders for the installation of telephones. A total of more than 40,000 telephones needed to be installed. On average, 6 telephones were installed for each order. Many chambers of commerce and families had installed one in each of the cities in their area of activity. This was 10 times the number of telephones installed in the Yun nation's imperial court and cities. This showed the affluence of the people of the Yun nation and their enthusiasm for telephones. With Renbachian's current manpower, he could install more than 300 telephones a day. It would take more than 3 months to install more than 40,000 telephones. In addition to the installation of telephones in the southern cities of Dayo and Tianjing Basin, they would be fully booked for at least half a year. In addition to the public telephones that were expected to cover all of Dayo's cities, it was estimated that it would take at least another year. A month later, Renbachian received a special telephone installation request. "Your Highness, you can't possibly refuse such a small request, right? Don't forget that we are still partners." Qing Lian looked at Renbachian with a smile. Well, she had read the term partner from a book that Renbachian gave her. "You want me to lay telephone lines in Great Xiao?" Renbachian smiled faintly and asked, "Do you know how much it costs to lay these cables?" Qing Lian smiled at him and slowly said, "Your Highness, you call that a telephone cable, right?" His Royal Highness used 20 pairs of telephone cables, which required 1 kilograms of copper per kilometer, which contained 51% copper. In other words, 1 kilometer required 7 kilograms of copper and 4 kilograms of insulating material. The distance from Iron Soa Pass to Little Jade Capital is 2,400 kilometers, and we need to go to Longchuan, Jiangyin, Qibei, Diao, Shandong, Xinglong, Xingqing, and Wu Road Pass. There are 8 routes, a total of 6,300 kilometers. Including the previous 2,400 kilometers, there was a total of 8,700 kilometers. Since the weight of a copper coin is 4 to 5 grams, we will count it as 5 grams. 1 tael of silver was equivalent to 1,200 copper, which was equivalent to 6 kilograms. I also roughly estimated the price of rubber. 1 kilogram wouldn't exceed 100 coppers, which is half the price of copper. Thus, excluding manpower, the cost of 1 kilometer was 2,180 copper coins. Based on the calculation of 2 taels of silver, the total cost would be 17,400 taels of silver. We can offer 200,000 taels of silver. Of course, I also know that this amount of silver isn't much to your highness, but Great Xia is vast and only you have the telephone technology. In the future, the entire Great Xia will have to rely on you in this aspect. These 8 routes are just the beginning, or it could be said that your highness did it out of convenience. However, His Highness's convenience is of great use to us. All of us are extremely grateful to your highness. Renbaqian looked at Qing Lian's confident face and felt that it was a pity that such a talent was wasted on fighting and killing. Scientific research should be her home. The Sea of Stars should be her goal. You should continue to study at the academy. Are those sword masters doing well here with your highness? Qing Lian asked with a smile. After this is over, I might have to join them and seek shelter under your highness. I do owe you a favor for this. I can't forget, so you don't have to remind me. Renbaqian knocked on the table. It's not that I can't agree to this. Renbaqian thought about whether he should take this opportunity to get them to give him a tax-free agreement to set up a telecommunications company in Great Xia in the future. Merchants in this world had to pay taxes, and the same was true for telecommunications companies. This was especially true in 10 to 20 years when everything in Great Xia was stable. Given the population of Great Xia, it wasn't impossible for a few intelligent people to imitate and research telephones and switchboards. There weren't any before, but no one thought of it. 10 to 20 years would be enough for them to study the principles based on the real thing. At that time, this agreement would give the Royal Telecommunications Company a great advantage in the market. However, after thinking about it carefully, it wasn't very meaningful for him to have these little ideas with these people. This wasn't Earth, and it wasn't a world where everything was linked to economics. His goals were to explore the foreign races outside of the land of exile and explore this world. Qing Lian looked at Renbaqian and waited for a moment before asking, "What other requests do you have, Your Highness?" "Forget it, there's nothing else." However, it would not be possible in a short period of time. They did not have enough manpower. It should be at least a year later. Renbaqian calculated the time in his mind. "Although I don't know what you were thinking about just now, I think that you gave up on a request that was beneficial to you. Thank you very much, Your Highness." Qing Lian was very clever. Looking at Renbaqian's expression, she could roughly guess some things, but didn't know the specifics. "You." Renbaqian pointed at her and said, "It's good that you know it. Don't act like you've gotten something good." Qing Lian chuckled and said again, "I don't think the laying of the circuit is complicated, and we can complete most of it ourselves. You only need to send a small number of people to assist. I believe that you can still send such a small number of people." Once again, Renbaqian felt that it was a pity for Qing Lian to follow those rebels to fight and kill. Even if such a talent wasn't sent to the research institute, she would still be a capable person in the imperial court. Currently, among the few students that he favored in the academy, none of them could compare to her in terms of knowledge or mind. What a pity. That's settled then. I'll send 10 people to assist you. Renbaqian nodded. Thank you, Your Highness. Qing Lian didn't look happy even though this trip was a success. In fact, she had never worried about this matter. Therefore, after the negotiation, Qing Lian said, "Previously, it was official business. Now that it's done, I would like to congratulate Your Highness and the Empress of Dayo on the birth of a child." If it were anyone else, she would naturally try to get closer to them before talking about official business. In Qing Lian's mind, there was no need to do so. "I've obtained several ancient scrolls recently, and I've brought them with me as a congratulatory gift for the little princess." Renbaqian subconsciously asked, "Did you dig up graves?" Qing Lian covered her mouth and chuckled. "Your Highness, you guessed it right. Baidu search 081 Chinese network yen. No advertising words." Chapter 1014. Renbochin carefully flipped through the ancient scrolls on the table. They were all bound with animal skin, and he couldn't tell what kind of animal skin it was made of. After so many years, they still hadn't been damaged at all. With just one glance, Renbochin was sure that these scrolls came from an era without any records. The two records of the Earth Dragon were divided into 2 volumes, which mainly recorded some rare beasts, herbs, and ores. Only a few of these records were the same as the existing herbs and ores, and most of them were extremely rare and precious. The first was Records of the Water Dragon, which was similar to the Records of the Earth Dragon, but the former was for land, while the latter was for water. The last was Using Water to Bathe the Eyes, which seemed to be a special method for training the eyes. The few types of water that were needed were all recorded in Records of the Water Dragon. The name was simple, but the effect was great. It was said that after mastering it, one's eyesight could reach up to 1,000 miles, which was considered powerful. For the people of this world, the ability to see up to 1,000 miles was a fairly powerful training method. However, with binoculars, this method wasn't very meaningful. What was really important were the 2 Records of the Earth Dragon and Records of the Water Dragon. Not only did they record the killers, herbs, and ores of the outside world, but there was also a small part of the water and mountain range map. It was of great significance for sending people to the outside world to find a hiding place to train. The previous phone call was only worth 200,000 taels of silver, but the value of these 3 books couldn't be measured with money. Where was the grave found? What's the situation inside? What else is there besides these? Renbochin asked seriously. Under the ancestral grave of a rich family, there was a simple stone room. Apart from these ancient scrolls, there was only a skeleton. I also got someone to bury the skeleton properly. Qing Lian smiled and said, I knew that you would be interested. You knew? Renbochin asked. Ma Hongyu of the Empire, Su Gongso of the Sun and Moon in the Palm, Lin Dong of the Jingtian sect, and Gao Yi of the Spear, these famous experts have been very active recently. Qing Lian pursed her lips. Renbochin nodded slightly. The rebel army was now more powerful than the imperial court of Great Xia, and the movements of these experts inevitably reached their ears. Thank you very much. If there are similar things in the future. Renbochin wanted to say that as long as he could afford it, he felt that it was too much. Got it. These things are useless in our hands. Besides, I am also very curious about some things. If your highness acts quickly, I might be able to see them in my lifetime. Qing Lian's expression finally changed a little when she said this. There was some anticipation, but there was also some sadness. Even if it was an ordinary person, after becoming a sword master, they could still become an expert. But the price was too heavy. They couldn't cultivate, and their lifespans were shorter than ordinary people. The lifespan of a sword master was usually only 60 or 70 years old. If they didn't fight often and had the support of resources, they might be able to live to 80 or 90 years old. This was their limit. Qing Lian was already 27 or 28 years old. If there were no accidents, she would only have 40 to 50 years left to live. This was why she said that if he moved quickly, she might be able to see him. With her intelligence, she was able to obtain a lot of information from the Water Dragon record and Earth Dragon record. Combined with the movements of Ma Hongyu and the others, even if she couldn't guess the whole picture, she could at least guess half of it. The advent of the telephone had brought about a storm that swept through the Yun nation, and it was getting more and more intense. According to this era, the function of the telephone was comparable to that of a magical artifact. However, compared to those strange legends, the telephone was something that many people could come into contact with. Whether it was families, chambers of commerce, various departments in every city, or even many wealthy households, they began to plan whether or not to install a telephone at home. Even though there wasn't a need for it for the time being. Most people in this era still lived in their own land, and ordinary people couldn't even walk out of a radius of 50 kilometers. However, it was a worthwhile deal to show off and earn some face with a few dozen taels of silver. As a result, the craze brought about by the telephone never subsided. This craze also played a great role in the promotion of the telephone. Even if there was no need for any more publicity, the number of telephone users would steadily increase. While the craze for the telephone was still ongoing, a new product appeared in front of everyone. It was a cargo truck. It looked like a Jifong 141, but its performance was only equivalent to that of a standard World War II truck. It weighed 4,000 kilograms and carried 6,000 kilograms, which was slightly lower than a tractor. Furthermore, it had much higher requirements for roads than a tractor. With the exception of going up mountains and down to the sea, the tractor had excellent traffic performance in most places, which was something that a truck couldn't achieve. This was also the reason why Rinpoche brought out a tractor, as it was much more practical than a truck. It was expensive, had a low carrying capacity, and had high requirements for roads. Despite having so many flaws, one advantage overshadowed all of them: speed. It was twice as fast as a tractor and could reach 240 kilometers per hour, which was equivalent to 60 kilometers per hour. It would take 10 to 15 days to travel from Lon City to Pingdu with an ox cart, 3 days with a tractor, and 1.5 days with a truck. This alone attracted the attention of many merchants in the Yun nation. Furthermore, this new product called a truck was much more comfortable to ride in than a tractor. At least it had a driver's compartment that could shelter people from the wind and rain. Furthermore, it was more stable and not as bumpy as a tractor, which made people want to vomit. 2,000 of these trucks were ordered as soon as they were launched. Many people were even prepared to use this thing as a daily means of transportation. The only thing that limited the popularization of this truck was the roads. However, there was another piece of news that appeared along with the truck. It was to recruit more than 1 million laborers from the Yun nation to build roads there. With the daily flow of caravans on the road from Lon City to the Yun nation, a large number of materials were transported to both places. Lon City was becoming increasingly prosperous, and the prices were much lower than before. The proportion of the revenue from commercial taxes in the national treasury was increasing. Even Tu Wan, who was a stingy person, agreed with Rinpoche, saying, "If you want to get rich, build roads first." There was another saying that Rinpoche always said, "Have more children and plant fewer trees." Furthermore, with the salt and iron mines returned to the imperial court and the revenue from the Department of Commerce, the national treasury's revenue had increased several times compared to before. The batch of gold and silver that was plundered from the Yun nation back then was still in the national treasury. Not only did it not decrease, but it was also increasing. As a result, there was no resistance in the imperial court to recruit laborers to build roads this time. It only took 3 days from the proposal to the agreement. The decree was passed down to all the cities in the Yun nation. City commander, get ready. A decree has arrived. The city commander of Sanha City was resting in his residence. When he heard the report, he hurriedly put on his clothes and ran out. When he arrived at the city commander's residence, he saw 3 aboriginal men dressed as soldiers. "I'm Long Yuewu, the city commander of this city. Are the 3 of you here to deliver the decree? You are the city commander. Receive it." One of the burly men took out a roll of paper from his bag and stuffed it into Long Yuewu's hand. "The decree has arrived. We will leave now." The 3 of them didn't wait for his reply. It seemed that they didn't even consider that he would refuse this decree and were about to leave after delivering the paper. "If you have nothing important to do, why don't you rest in this city for a while?" Long Yuewu quickly asked. "I don't have the time. I still have to go to other cities." The 3 burly men didn't give him any face and turned to leave. Long Yuewu was moved. He didn't know why they still had to go to other cities. These barbarians are very unreasonable, a young scholar said as he walked out from behind the door. Don't let me hear the word barbarian ever again, Long Yuewu said unhappily. The scholar's expression changed slightly as he lowered his head and said, it's a slip of the tongue. Furthermore, it might not be a bad thing for them to be like this, Long Yuewu added. Regardless of whether it was delivering a decree or something else, the news was delivered without any sloppiness. It wasn't like the Yun nation, where if there was an envoy from the imperial court, they would not only receive him extravagantly, but they would also send gifts. Previously, he had been forced to become the city commander because he wanted to ensure the survival of the people in this city. As for what it felt like to be the city commander, he simply didn't dare to think too much about it. He didn't expect that after a few years, his position as the city commander would be so stable. Furthermore, the Aboriginals wouldn't give him any trouble. It wasn't as chaotic as the Yun nation, which saved him a lot of trouble. As such, he really liked the Aboriginal style. Long Yuewu opened the scroll and glanced at it. His expression changed slightly. Sir, what's the matter? This time, the imperial court wants to recruit 1 million laborers to build the official road. 1 million laborers. The scholar was also moved. That's right. Our city needs 28,000 laborers. Long Yuewu said in a deep voice. The two of them weren't surprised by the number, but by the fact that it was actually labor and not corvée labor. One had to know that corvée labor didn't get paid. In previous years, corvée labor was used to build roads in cities. On the other hand, labor had to be paid. Everyone gets 1 tael of silver a month. Long Yuewu said again. It wasn't a little, but a lot. This was already the normal income of an ordinary citizen. Some of the poorer ones didn't even have this income. One had to know that this was labor, and every city had to provide a sufficient number of people. It was a little mandatory, and even 800 copper coins as a salary was a lot. 1 tael of silver as a salary and food was included. This treatment was simply generous. That was why the two of them were surprised. Long Yuewu had mixed feelings in his heart. When he took office as the city commander, he was prepared to be criticized in the back. In the end, after the Aboriginals conquered the Yun nation, not only did they not exploit him, but they also used conciliatory methods. Since they were conciliatory, there was no need for him to say or do much. He just had to follow the imperial court's orders. After a few years, he had gained some reputation. Long Yuewu thought about the Yun nation's emperor, who had favored Prime Minister Xian Yong, and the Prime Minister, who had eliminated dissidents in the face of a great enemy, and he had mixed feelings. Long Yuewu rolled up the scroll and held it in his hand before instructing the scholar, go and summon the chief librarian and Minister Sima. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, booksellers mobile. Chapter 10-15. The recruitment of laborers went smoothly. The imperial court forcefully allocated the number of laborers to each city. There were more than 400 cities, and the smaller cities had to send more than 10,000 people while the bigger cities had to send 30,000 to 40,000 people. Although it would have a little impact on the cities, it wasn't a big deal. The Yun nation also had a population of nearly 100 million. This wasn't like sending able-bodied men to war. The wages were sufficient, and there wasn't much backlash from the people. On the contrary, the wages were too generous, and many people doubted whether they could really get it. As for the other classes, such as scholars, wealthy families, and merchants, they were happy to see this happen and were even looking forward to it. After all, after walking the road from Lon City to Pingdu, the road to the Yun nation was no different from a country road. In just 20 days, millions of laborers were recruited to start building the road to the Yun nation. The first was the road from Pingdu to Wangjing. After it was repaired, it would only take 2 days for tractors and 1 day for trucks to travel from Pingdu to Wangjing. In other words, with trucks, fresh seafood from the sea could be delivered to Lon City in 2.5 days. For the people of Deo who had a hard time eating, this was an excellent thing. After all, as far as Rinpoche knew, there was kelp in this world, but the fishermen of the Yun nation didn't eat it. The various resources in the sea were also extremely rich. At present, the ingredients in the sea were what Rinpoche cared about the most. This was because he wanted to expand the planting area of soybeans and other oil crops that were used as raw materials for biodiesel. This would reduce the farming and grazing area in Deo, which wasn't considered rich. In this case, the sea was an excellent source of food. Shaojiang Academy. The sound of people reading echoed in the academy. The sound of students reading had always been Ning Changqing's favorite. At this time, Ning Changqing, who was nearly 70 years old, was sitting in the courtyard with his eyes closed. He was listening to his favorite reading, but his eyebrows were furrowed. "Dean, we can't go on like this." Sitting not far away from him was a scholarly scholar who was about 50 years old. "Oh, Amos replied softly, his eyes still closed. Shaojiang Academy was one of the top 5 academies in the Yun nation. For hundreds of years, there had been many important officials from the academy. There were 2 prime ministers. There were countless officials, big and small. Ever since the establishment of the Shaojiang Academy, it had emphasized, a good country should not nurture talents first, a way to nurture talents should not first encourage them to learn. When students entered the academy, they would be enrolled in different subjects according to their specialties. The curriculum advocated practical application and field investigation, which was called understanding and applying. Furthermore, he proposed, it is necessary to teach the economic industry and obtain economic talents. It was very compatible with the strong business atmosphere of the Yun nation. Thus, although Shaojiang Academy was one of the 5 great academies, it was one of the 2 most famous academies. As for the most famous one, it was the Wangjing Academy, which was based on the study of scriptures. But in terms of students, Shaojiang Academy was the best at practical work. In fact, in the eyes of many, the Shaojiang Academy was the leader of the 5 great academies. Logically speaking, with such a famous Shaojiang Academy, there shouldn't be anything for the old dean to worry about. That was how it had always been. However, a few years ago, the Yun nation had fallen, and the emperor had been captured. Everything had changed overnight. From then on, Ning Changqing always frowned. Especially in the past 2 years, Ning Changqing's frown had become more frequent, and he had also become more and more aged. When the others saw this, they naturally knew it wasn't easy. However, they had to think of a way. Ever since the fall of the Yun nation, it had been a few years since a student had become an official. There were no examinations in Deo and the Yun nation. It could be said that the future of the students had been cut off. In the past, the students in the academy wouldn't even take a second look at the merchants. But now, when students from ordinary families left the academy, most of them went to work for merchants. What did the teachers in the academy think of this? Not to mention that the number of students in the past 2 years was only half of what it used to be. Many of the teachers in the academy were anxious when they saw this. Another scholar sighed. He knew that it was useless to look for the old dean in today's world. The aboriginals only cared about their fists and didn't care about knowledge. Most of the time, he just wanted to vent his frustration. In fact, there is a way. Ning Changqing suddenly opened his eyes. However, after saying this, he shook his head and closed his eyes again. Let's wait. The scholar laughed bitterly. Indeed, they could only wait. If there was a change of dynasty, the new emperor would definitely hold a major examination to fill in a large number of officials. In addition, holding a major examination would signify the end of everything and the beginning of a new dynasty. It was also intended to rope in the scholars and stop them from gossiping. It wasn't that the Dayo imperial court didn't lack officials. On the contrary, it was extremely lacking. It was just that the fierce aboriginals had no intention of roping in the scholars. As a result, these scholars were at a loss. Not to mention whether they were willing to work for the aboriginals or not, they didn't even have the opportunity to work for the aboriginals. The aboriginals didn't seem to care about them at all. However, looking at the aboriginals' conciliatory behavior, they would rope in the scholars of the Yun nation sooner or later. They just had to wait. At the thought of this, the scholar felt extremely complicated. On one hand, Dayo was their enemy. On the other hand, the Yun nation was now under Dayo's rule. On the contrary, it wasn't as chaotic as before, and the people were living a better life than before. Just like the conscription in the past few days. If the Yun nation was still in power, they would probably become forced labor and end up in misery. Furthermore, the behavior of the aboriginals in the past 2 years was completely different from the fierce and overbearing aboriginals of the past. The two of them sat in the courtyard, each thinking of their own thoughts. At this moment, an old man rushed in and said, "Dean, something has happened." "What's the matter?" Ning Chongqing opened his eyes. "Don't worry, speak slowly." Ning Chongqing's eyes weren't muddy like an old man's. Instead, they were clear and intelligent. The old man took a deep breath and said, "A few aboriginal soldiers are at the door and want to see you, Dean." Ning Chongqing knocked on the armrest of the chair twice, stood up, and walked out. "Dean, should we inform the others?" The scholar got up and followed behind him with a worried look. He didn't know what the aboriginal soldiers were here for. "Don't alarm the others." Ning Chongqing waved his hand. It might not be a bad thing. A moment later, Ning Chongqing arrived at the entrance of the academy. The old man didn't know the purpose of their visit and hurriedly ran to the academy to report the news before leaving them outside. Fortunately, they didn't look impatient. "Gentlemen, I'm the dean here. Sorry for the delay. Please come in and talk." "There's no need. We'll give you the letter." "We'll leave after you reply," said a woman in her 20s who was wearing armor. She took out a letter from her bosom and handed it to Ning Chongqing. "Gentlemen, please wait for a moment." Ning Chongqing took the letter unhurriedly and opened it. He frowned, relaxed, frowned, and relaxed again. The scholar beside him looked at his frown and felt like pressing his fingers to smooth it out. "Please report to Zhao Prince Consort that I will bring the students of the academy for an exchange." "Got it." The person turned and left. After the other person left, the middle-aged scholar asked, "Dean, what kind of exchange?" Ning Chongqing's frown finally widened. "Didn't I tell you to wait?" "You've waited." Ning Chongqing continued, "Zhao Prince Consort invited the students of the academy to visit Black Bamboo College for an exchange. That's what the letter said." Chapter 10:16. Black Bamboo Academy. I heard that it was founded by Zhao Prince Consort and supported by him alone. Apart from him, there's only Lin Mengxing, the scholar said with a strange tone. A single person supporting an entire academy. And a few hundred students. He wondered what kind of students he could teach. It sounded more like a private school in a village. Oh, there were 2 students now, and they had been upgraded to a private school in town. In fact, this was the only academy in the Aboriginals' territory. An exchange visit. They didn't know what was there to exchange. Of course, the purpose of this letter wasn't to communicate. "No matter what, it's a good thing," the scholar murmured. He wanted to let the Aboriginals see the ability of the academy's students and let them understand the difference between a village private school and the 5 big academies. It could also give the academy's students a better future. As for whether the students were willing to work for the Aboriginals, he wasn't too worried. Shaojiang Academy was different from Wangjing Academy. It focused on practicality, unlike Wangjing Academy that focused on the study of scriptures. If it were Wangjing Academy, they would probably hesitate and even spit at this kind of thing. However, Shaojiang Academy wouldn't. Now that it was ruled by the Aboriginals, they could only put their knowledge to good use and benefit the people of the Yun Nation if they entered that system. How many students should I bring? The scholar began to calculate the most promising students in the academy. I didn't say how many. Too many wouldn't be appropriate, and too few would make us look weak. After all, it's an exchange, so let's set it at 20. Ning Chongqing said. He naturally realized that the scholar was looking down on Black Bamboo Academy just now. However, he didn't think it was that simple. Zhao Prince Consort wasn't simple. Not to mention the tractors, trucks, glass, silver mirrors, and noisy phone calls. In just 1 year, he had pacified Tianjin Basin and sent those people to the Yun Nation. They had played a great role in the war between Dayou and the Yun Nation. This wasn't something an ordinary person could do. Although he was a prince consort, it was one thing for the Empress to fall in love with him, but it was another for the people in Dayou's imperial court to agree with him. From the policies of the Aboriginals in the Yun Nation, his shadow could be seen everywhere. Just these 2 points alone were enough to show his talent. In the past, Black Bamboo Academy relied on him alone. Later on, there were only 2 of them, including Lin Mengxing. It was impossible for the 2 of them to teach hundreds of students. Moreover, he heard that there were more than a few hundred students in Black Bamboo Academy. There were a total of 6 grades and thousands of students. He really didn't know if he had a doppelganger technique. Otherwise, how could he teach so many students? After thinking about it, Ning Chongqing decided to keep his doubts to himself. In any case, he would be able to see what the students of the Black Bamboo Academy were like in a few days. Dean, they didn't just invite us this time, right? Could there be Wangjing Academy and Jiangling Academy as well? The scholar suddenly thought of something. If that's the case, I'm afraid we'll have to communicate with them. The scholar emphasized the word communication. In the past, when the 5 academies met, there would often be competitions. Everyone wanted to suppress the other. Furthermore, they were in Lan City, in front of the entire imperial court of Dayou. In the past, they were all in the Yun Nation and knew each other very well. It didn't affect them much even if they won or lost. However, it was different this time. Whichever academy could suppress the others would immediately enter the eyes of the imperial court of Dayou. The academies would also be more valued in the eyes of the imperial court of Dayou. In the future, the students of the academies would also be looked up to. This time, it was much more important than those previous exchanges. Not to mention the possibility of accepting the children of some important Aboriginal officials to study in the academies. Ning Chongqing frowned. He understood what the scholar was thinking. After thinking for a while, he sighed. Go and inform the students to see who wants to go. Shui Yuanpei, Ma Hualong, and Chao Gui want to go. Yes. The scholar left with a smile on his face. These 3 students were the most outstanding students in the academy in recent years. Each of them was a talent for governing the world. This scene didn't only happen in Shaojiang Academy, but also in several other academies. Every academy that received the invitation understood the importance of the exchange at Black Bamboo Academy. Therefore, they sent their most outstanding students to prepare for a good exchange with the other academies. As for the original owner of Black Bamboo Academy, they just had to find a place and watch over it. Not many people thought that an academy with only 2 people could produce outstanding students. Even though most people knew that Zhao Prince Consort was a talented man, they still couldn't accept it. Lin Mengxing couldn't be underestimated either. However, there were only 2 of them. Which of the 5 major academies didn't have dozens of teachers? Which of them didn't have some talent? After a while, they would find out that it wasn't just the 5 major academies that were invited. Instead, all 23 famous academies in the Yun Nation were invited. However, in their hearts, their opponents were still the other 4 academies. The other academies were just spectators. While many of the academies in the Yun Nation were preparing, Renbachian simply said to the students, "There will be a group of students from the Yun Nation coming for an exchange in a month." He then returned to Earth with Honeysuckle. They were going back to watch the Olympics. This was the first time that manual experts were allowed to participate in the Olympics. Although martial arts had been spread on Earth for 20 years, the previous Olympic Games were still attended by ordinary athletes. Of course, it wasn't right to say that they were ordinary athletes. In fact, there had been great changes in the previous Olympic Games, but they were still limited to those below the man-wheel level. There was a huge gap between the man-wheel and those below the man-wheel level. Now, this restriction had finally been lifted. It was estimated that there would be a large number of man-wheel athletes participating in this year's Olympics. Therefore, Renbachian was still very interested. Not only him, but everyone on Earth was also full of expectations. After all, martial arts had entered everyone's lives, whether it was in China or abroad. Everyone was paying attention to the amazing strength that the man-wheel experts would display when they appeared in the competition. Renbachian put Honeysuckle aside and told her not to break the window. Then, he called his assistant over and asked, "Has everything been arranged?" "Yes, as long as you arrive at the competition venue. You can watch any of the VIP seats for all the events." Renbachian nodded. Although the Olympic Games had a 14-day schedule, he could only watch for 7 days at most. 7 days was enough. All he had to do was read something he was interested in. Chapter 10:17. "Father, where are we going?" Honeysuckle sat beside Renbachian and looked out the window at the scenery outside with a happy face. The scenery on Earth and Lawn City were very different. The tall buildings, the colorful colors, the rolling traffic, and the sea of people all excited her. She felt that this place was much more interesting than the palace. She just didn't know why her father and mother didn't live here. To see something interesting. Renbachian rubbed Honeysuckle's head. After a while, he suddenly asked, "Honeysuckle, do you want to go to school?" "Go to school? What is that?" Honeysuckle turned her head and looked at her father doubtfully. "It's to learn and grow with many children," Renbachian said thoughtfully. "Is it fun?" Honeysuckle still couldn't imagine what it would be like to study with many children. In her past, other than the occasional visits to her home at a very high place and the occasional trips to the streets by her father, all her other memories were in the palace. Maybe. Renbachian looked at the passing scenery outside the window with a thoughtful look in his eyes. He was wondering if it was time to find a kindergarten for Honeysuckle. Although Honeysuckle's intelligence grew faster than that of ordinary children, the growth of intelligence also required sufficient experience as a foundation. Honeysuckle's current intelligence and learning ability were comparable to that of a 7- or 8-year-old child. However, she played in the palace every day and came into contact with the people there, so her intelligence wasn't as high as it actually was. At most, she was at the level of a 4- or 5-year-old child. In particular, she was too unfamiliar with many things in the outside world and couldn't even compare to ordinary children. Although she could be educated in the palace, it was better to let her see and interact with things in person than to rely on books to broaden her horizons. Therefore, Renbachian considered letting her go to kindergarten. The locations were Earth and Dayo. In Dayo, he could open a kindergarten and let Honeysuckle come into contact with more children of officials and commoners. However, the things she came into contact with on Earth were completely different. With the learning experience on Earth, her horizons and thoughts were completely different, so she had to go to kindergarten on Earth. Not only kindergarten, but elementary school, middle school, high school, and even university, Renbachian was prepared to let her go. As for the time, it was easier to arrange. 5 days in Dayo and 5 days on Earth were perfectly staggered with weekends. Other people's children went to school 5 days a week, but Two Flower was better. He went to school 10 days a week. There were two problems. Firstly, Honeysuckle was 1.3 meters tall. No matter how you looked at her, she looked like a 7 or 8-year-old child. She didn't look like a kindergartner. If she entered kindergarten, she would really be outstanding and like a crane among chickens. Moreover, her muscles looked rather strange to the others. The other thing was her control over her power. In the palace, even the roaring emperor and the golden-haired man, whom she trampled on every day, were at the manual level. As for the children in the kindergarten, if she couldn't control her own strength, something bad would really happen. It seems like I have to teach her how to control her power first. Renbachian thought to himself. She had been doing this since she was born, but the effect was sometimes good and sometimes bad. Every once in a while, she would be able to absorb a portion of the essence that she had obtained from the Empress and stored in her body. As a result, her strength would increase a little. After that, he needed to get used to his new strength. Now, her strength had grown from the strength of 1,500 kilograms when she was born to more than 2,500 kilograms, which was a little higher than his own strength. However, she hadn't been trained in the use of her strength, and her punch didn't even have the force of 2,500 kilograms. One had to know that an Earth Will expert's punch could have 4 to 6 times the force of impact. This wasn't just the strength of the hands, but also the strength of the legs, waist, and the body. The explosive force of a Cardinal Heaven expert was even stronger and could reach more than 10 times the force of impact. This was the difference between having martial arts and not, and between a Cardinal Heaven expert and a Cardinal Heaven expert. This was why a Cardinal Heaven expert could cause so much damage. This was also why a Cardinal Heaven expert was so much stronger than an Earth Will expert. According to normal strength, a Cardinal Heaven expert would generally have the strength of 3,000 to 4,000 kilograms, and an Earth Will expert would have the strength of 1,000 kilograms. In reality, the difference was like heaven and earth. Even so, her destructive power couldn't be underestimated. One had to know that she was only 3 years old. 2,500 kilograms of force was enough for her to demolish houses, kindergartens, schools, and most of the living things on Earth. While Renbachian was thinking, the car began to slow down. Looking out of the window, there was a turbulent flow of cars and people. They were nearing the stadium. There were many single-person aircraft in the air, and they were all responsible for maintaining order and guiding the people. Nowadays, many countries had introduced policies to limit the height of single-person aircraft. However, China's air traffic control had never been lax, and only certain functional departments could use it. Outside the window, a large number of people waving national flags were walking on the streets. Waves of singing came from their mouths, and everyone had a smile on their faces. The 2048 Olympic Games would be held in Shanghai. There was only one reason why the Olympic Games would be held in Shanghai. Some people did it on purpose. First, it was because the strength of the manual participants was very high for the organizers. If the organizers were too weak, they wouldn't be able to suppress thousands of manual participants, and it would be easy to cause trouble. China, which had a large population and a large number of experts, was naturally the best choice. The second reason was that some people wanted to see if there would be any trouble. Therefore, 10 years ago, it was decided that Shanghai would host the Olympic Games. A few years ago, it was also decided that the strength of the participants for this Olympic Games would be restricted to the manual level. It was hard to say how much of this was done with bad intentions. However, the Chinese officials were also very confident in hosting the Olympic Games. At least so far, there hadn't been any trouble after the opening ceremony. Even if someone didn't open their eyes, they would be quickly suppressed by the powerful power of the Chinese government. As far as Renbachyan knew, 8 of the more than 10 Earth-will experts had been sent here. Father, they seem to be very happy. Honeysuckle leaned against the window and looked outside with envy on his face. She also wanted to be like those people, walking in the crowd, singing, and drinking together. This was more important. It was much more interesting than sitting in the car. Renbachyan touched her head again and didn't answer. Fortunately, the journey wasn't too long, and they soon arrived at their destination. Renbachyan brought Nianhua to a private room under the guidance of his assistant. The private room was semi-open. Brother. Uncle. In the private room next door were Ren Wanyan and Ren Xia. There were also a few people they didn't know. They weren't sure if they were the executives or clients of Ren Wanyan's company. Ren Wanyan was 48 years old at the moment. Ren Xia was already 15 years old. He looked like a rather handsome youth and was full of vigor. Ren Xia is more handsome than you. Renbachyan smiled at everyone. The pupil has surpassed the master. Ren Wanyan laughed calmly. When he looked at his son, his eyes were filled with indescribable affection. This son of his did not let him down. He didn't have too many bad habits like rich kids, and his only shortcoming was that he was more extravagant. However, extravagance wasn't a shortcoming for him. He had a straightforward and amiable personality, studied hard, and was talented in cultivation. Now, he was only one step away from the Manwell level. This was considered pretty good among the younger generation. However, he couldn't compare to his brother's little princess. He couldn't compare to her, and no one could. Father. Nianhua pointed at herself and smiled happily at Ren Wanyan and Ren Xia. Renbachyan swung his hand and slapped the back of her head. What's your name? Nianhua immediately felt wronged. Nianhua. Pfft, the people in the private room next door who didn't know her immediately burst into laughter. Renbachyan's face darkened and he felt a little embarrassed. What's your name? Nianhua looked back at her father with tears in her eyes. After a while, she felt wronged and said, Can I call you Yuqing? Baidu search 881 Chinese network yen. No advertising slogan. Chapter 10:18. It wasn't shameful for his daughter to be called Hua. At most, it was a little rustic. Who didn't have a nickname like Gooden? However, it was rather awkward for the eldest princess of a country to be called Hua. Furthermore, she was the eldest princess of a huge empire that was 2/3 the size of China. However, Renbachyan quickly put this matter aside. Ren Wanyan eagerly introduced the other people in the room to Renbachyan. They were all famous entrepreneurs and also his business partners. Of course, Renbachyan didn't know any of them. He just nodded kindly as a sign of his goodwill. He was more familiar with Chief Ma, Second Ma, Face-Blind Dong, and the pig farm owner. However, those people had long retired, and the grass on their graves was already 3 meters tall. No one could resist the baptism of time. However, in the eyes of others, Renbachyan was an exception. After a few decades, he didn't seem to have changed much. In the eyes of the higher-ups of the country, even though they were envious, they knew the reason. In the eyes of others, looking at Renbachyan, whose appearance hadn't changed much, was like looking at a strange person. For example, some of Ren Wanyan's business partners knew that he had an elder brother who wasn't a simple person. However, at this moment, he looked more than 10 years younger than Ren Wanyan and had the appearance of a young man. Even those who didn't know him would know that he wasn't a simple person just by looking at him. It wasn't just because of his fierce appearance or young look. It was because of his imposing manner, which couldn't be developed unless he was in a high position and held great power. Renbachyan kindly nodded to everyone and returned to his seat with Hua. Father, there are so many people down there. Can we sit there? Erhua sat on the chair as if there were nails under her, but she couldn't sit still for a moment and kept moving around. She was wearing a white inner garment with a blue chiffon dress and a single ponytail. The clothes were quite old-fashioned and didn't stand out on her at all. Instead, it was very harmonious, as if she was supposed to wear it this way. Moreover, with the emergence of cultivation methods, there were more and more people dressed in Han clothing in recent years. Therefore, people would not find her clothes strange. However, her personality was like a monkey's. According to Rinpochen, she was hyperactive. Just call me father outside. Rinpochen rubbed her head. Father. Erhua always felt that father was a very noble title. His father was his father, so he had to listen to him. In the future, he must let others call him dad and let them listen to him. Honeysuckle was still young, but his mind was filled with a lot of things. It was filled with the imagination of a child his age. Erhua rolled his eyes and saw the bottle on the table. His face was filled with envy as he thought, wine. He asked, Father, can I drink it? If others were to see her like that, they would definitely feel pity for her. Such a young lady had to be so careful even when drinking juice. Her upbringing was too strict. However, no one could imagine her glorious history of sneaking out to a restaurant and drinking with others. The bamboo stir-fried meat didn't make her feel anything, but the three-character classic really scared her. He stayed in the palace for at least 3 days before he tried to sneak out again. Unfortunately, he failed and was punished to copy the three-character classic 50 times. This time, he had a better memory and behaved himself for 4 days. Not long after, the private room on the other side was also filled with 6 or 7 people. Someone greeted Ren Wanyan and even chatted with him. During this time, Ren Wanyan naturally introduced him as his elder brother. The other party was a man in his 30s or 40s. After thinking for a long time, he still couldn't figure out who Rinpochen was. However, the fact that Rinpochen was sitting in a private room instead of Ren Wanyan's was enough to show that he wasn't a simple person. One had to know that a private room for a popular event like the Olympic Games couldn't be booked even with money. Rinpochen greeted him perfunctorily. He wasn't interested in socializing with these people and couldn't even be bothered to remember their names. In another 10 years, there would be a new group of people. This person is quite arrogant. Another young man in the private room saw his perfunctory expression and laughed softly. I wonder which deity he is. Director Liu, you are being looked down upon. The person called Director Liu was the one who greeted Ren Wanyan earlier. His expression didn't change, and he just patted Ren Wanyan's arm before sitting down indifferently. That young man chuckled. He looked indifferent, but it seemed like he was angry at being looked down upon. He had quite a bit of strength in his hands. One had to know that Director Liu was a rising star in the country in the past 10 years. He wasn't old, but he was the boss of a high-tech company. His net worth wasn't low, and he had a lot of followers in the industry. His weakness was that he wasn't very tolerant. However, the other party was Ren Wanyan's relative, so Director Liu probably didn't dare to make an enemy and could only swallow his anger. One had to know that Ren Wanyan wasn't just a rising star, but a giant of the new generation. With a smile in his eyes, the young man turned his head and saw Honeysuckle leaning against the glass fence and looking down. With a look of longing, he smiled and asked, "Little girl, what's your name?" When Honeysuckle heard the voice, she turned her head in confusion. The other party asked again. Honeysuckle turned her head and saw that her father wasn't looking at her. Then, she stood up proudly and pointed to herself. "Father." The young man's expression suddenly froze. He looked at Honeysuckle playfully and pointed behind her. "Your father is over there." Honeysuckle stubbornly pointed to herself and said, "Call me father." This time, the young man finally confirmed that he wasn't mistaken. He felt a little awkward, but he couldn't argue with such a young child, so he could only turn his head away. The people nearby all chuckled when they saw this. The young man and director Lu were both wondering who Ren Wanyan's biological brother was. Soon, the match was about to begin. It was the first round of the women's table tennis singles group stage. As the match time approached, the audience in the arena began to spontaneously wave the national flag and sing the national anthem. Honeysuckle listened attentively. When it was the second round, she immediately jumped onto the table and sang along. She loved this kind of excitement. Honeysuckle's first voice stunned most of the people in the spectator stand. Her voice was loud, too loud. If one had to describe it, it would be like the roar of a legendary dragon. One person could drown out the voices of hundreds of people. Those who were close to her couldn't hear anything except her voice. They all turned their heads and looked at her in shock. The young man who had spoken to her before was even more shocked. This little girl looked quite delicate, but why was her voice so terrifying? It was shocking enough for such a little girl to let out such a dragon-like roar. But that wasn't the only thing that shocked them. What was even more terrifying was that she had sung the national anthem with a childish voice that sounded like a death rock song. She simply suppressed the entire audience. Half of the spectator stand was emptied. Even the cameras turned to capture the 7- or 8-year-old girl jumping on the table. This was a live broadcast to all the people around the world who were watching the match. Ren Bachyan sat in the chair behind her and was brainwashed by the demonic music. He watched her jump on the table with a dark face. However, after thinking about it, he stopped his hand that was about to pull her back. This child has been cooped up in the palace for too long. Ren Bachyan knew why she was so excited as soon as she came out. Therefore, he didn't disturb her rare indulgence. Below the stage, the match began. Lu Xiaoling from China versus Sonam from India. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 10:19. As everyone knows, this year's Olympic Games is a special one. Since the emergence of martial arts more than 20 years ago, there have been a large number of martial artists who are far stronger than ordinary people. These martial artists have always been banned from participating in the Olympic Games. Over the years, many well-known athletes have suddenly disappeared from the field because of this reason, and some even abruptly withdrew from the competition. This year's Olympic Games has broken this restriction, and athletes who have reached the Xian level can also participate. Earth will officially call it the Man-Will level, but most of the time, it is called the Xian level. Heaven, Earth, Xian, and Huang are more in line with the habits of the people. The Xian level is equivalent to the Man-Will level, the Earth level is equivalent to the Earth-Will level, and the Heaven level is equivalent to the Spirit-Will level. Although the people on Earth know about this, they aren't very clear about the Sky Gate. This is because the Sky Gate involves the spirit and the spiritual body. It has always been classified as metaphysics, which is the weakness of the current scientific system. The two athletes on the field are both powerful Xian level. Everyone is familiar with Lu Xiaoling, who has participated in the Olympic Games before. She broke through to the Xian level a few years ago, and according to the official information, she is at the intermediate level. Sonam is also an older athlete, but she is at the beginning level of the Xian level. She is slightly weaker than Lu Xiaoling, and we don't know what kind of impact she will have in the competition. Now, let's see what kind of amazing game the two powerful athletes can bring us in this game, and how different it will be from previous games. As Ren Bachyan listened to the commentator's explanation, he folded his arms and looked at the stage with interest. Hua jumped onto the fence in front of him and balanced along the fence. He quickly jumped down, drank a big glass of juice, and went over to Ren Wanyan's side to see what they were doing. The two athletes below had already started the competition. As soon as the game started, there was a burst of exclamations in the field, which attracted Erhua's attention. The movements of the two people on the field were too fast. The speed of their feet, the speed of their racket, and the speed of the ball were all too fast. Those who were weaker couldn't even see the ball clearly. They could only see the two people moving quickly on both sides of the tennis table, and every time they swung their racket, they could make a very clear and loud slap sound. Too fast, too fast. Both of them are too fast. I can't even see the ball. Now, I can only analyze their movements through the slow motion of the small screen. Soon, the score jumped to 2 o'clock. Lu Xiaoling was in the lead, followed by Sonam. Looks like Lu Xiaoling's movements are a little faster. From her expression, it can be seen that she's still at ease. Sonam, on the other hand, is having a hard time. There's already sweat on his forehead after just a few exchanges. Lu Xiaoling has already gotten 4 points. Looks like Sonam is exhausted. Everyone could look at the ground under their feet. There was nothing unusual under Lu Xiaoling's feet, but there was a row of footprints under Sonam's feet. It was the result of exerting too much force on the plastic floor. We can see that Sonam is doing her best. Nowadays, manual experts weren't rare in China, and there were many manual experts among the commoners. Some joined the government, while others continued their own lives, went to work, or engaged in other businesses. There was nothing wrong with saying that the experts were hidden among the people. Although there were currently only earth-will experts in the government, there were quite a number of man-will experts among the commoners. Fortunately, the country was prepared for these situations. Every man-will expert needed to be registered. The combat detection glasses from back then played a great role. Coupled with the country's Skynet system, even if these man-will experts committed crimes, they would be quickly arrested and wouldn't cause too much harm to society. As a result, even though the commoners were envious of man-will experts, they were relatively calm. Currently, there were even a few movie stars who were man-will experts. However, this was the first time that a man-will expert had participated in an Olympic competition. Although everyone knew that man-will experts were powerful, they were still shocked by the competition. With the strength of a man-will expert and professional training, the contestants in the competition displayed unimaginable strength, which was even more shocking from a visual point of view. Renbachian's curiosity was satisfied and he began to focus on other things. At this moment, someone knocked on the door of the private room. "Come in," Renbachian said without turning his head. The person who came in was a sage-like man in a long robe and had a beard. He was about 50 years old. "Mr. Ren. You are." Renbachian looked back and didn't recognize this person. However, this person was actually an earth-will expert. One had to know that there were only a dozen earth-will experts in the country. "I'm Qing Daozi. Sorry to disturb you." Renbachian thought about the other party's purpose for coming, pointed to the sofa next to him, and said, "Sit down and talk." Qing Daozi's expression suddenly changed, and he looked behind Renbachian and said, "Be careful." Renbachian's expression turned solemn as he stretched out his arm to grab Lu Hua's position, intending to pull her into his embrace and protect her. His heart raced. Was there an attack? Who was it? He didn't feel any killing intent. What kind of weapon was the other party using? However, before he could finish his thoughts, his outstretched arm caught nothing. "Mr. Ren, your daughter jumped down," Qing Daozi said anxiously. Renbachian then realized that the other party's warning wasn't directed at him but at Lu Hua. He suddenly got up and looked down, only to see a small figure leaping up from the crowd below. The target was the arena. This gave Renbachian a headache. It was one thing for Lu Hua to cause trouble in the palace, but this was the Olympics. What was she going to do? At the thought of this, Renbachian leaped up and tried to grab Lu Hua back. However, the arena wasn't big, and with Lu Hua's speed, she had already landed on the arena. Before anyone could react, she snatched the racket from Sonam's hand and backhanded the ball that Lu Xiaoling had hit. No one could react to this sudden scene. It was too fast. From the moment she suddenly jumped into the arena, snatched the racket, sent Sonam flying, and backhanded the ball back, it all happened in an instant. The players in the arena were replaced. Instead of Sonam, she was replaced by a 1.3-meter-tall little girl with a ponytail and an exquisite face, dressed in an ancient costume. Even Sonam's opponent didn't retaliate and even hit the ball back. Lu Xiaoling excitedly hit the ball back. Lu Xiaoling hit the ball back again. Lu Hua hit the ball back. Ren Baqian's face darkened while he was still in the air. However, Lu Hua didn't think too much about it. In her eyes, this was just a game. She felt that she was much better than that person. She should be the one playing. As for the arena and the fact that she couldn't play, this was beyond her understanding. She was a princess, and her past experience told her that she could do anything in the palace except demolishing it. After all, this was the thinking of a child without common sense. That was why such an unimaginable scene happened. Before Ren Baqian landed, Lu Hua had already played 3 balls with Lu Xiaoling and then hit the ball in her face with the racket. Lu Xiaoling's head was raised backward. The petrified audience in front of the TV felt the pain. Then, a bald, burly, and ferocious-looking man landed from the sky, grabbed the delicate girl, and dashed into the crowd, disappearing in the blink of an eye. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 10:20. What just happened? The commentator's exclamation rang out in the arena. Just now, a little girl jumped into the arena and snatched Sonam's racket. She played 3 rounds with Lu Xiaoling before she was caught and taken away. Something unexpected happened on the table tennis field of the Olympic Games. Because of this unexpected incident, the game was temporarily interrupted. Even Lu Xiaoling couldn't react in time and played 3 rounds with the opponent. At this point, the commentator's tone became a little strange. It was indeed unexpected for something like this to happen, but Lu Xiaoling actually played 3 rounds with the opponent with a dumbfounded look. This was the main reason why he was speechless just now. In particular, Lu Xiaoling was hit in the face by the opponent's last ball, her nose was bleeding, and she was being helped off the stage by her teammates and coach to stop the bleeding. Let's look at the replay of the match. This little girl jumped over from the private room. She was very fast, no, too fast. If it weren't for the slow-motion camera, we wouldn't have been able to see her figure clearly. This is also the reason why the security forces in the arena couldn't react in time. It's hard to imagine that a little girl could be so fast. The signal wasn't cut off immediately, but the slow-motion camera was replayed instead. This also meant that China had changed in many aspects after becoming the world's most powerful country. In the past, the signal would have been cut off on the spot and replaced with advertisements. As the stadium and the TV cameras switched to the replay and slow motion, the stadium almost exploded. Everyone in front of the TV in the distance also came back to their senses. Their faces were filled with astonishment and shock, and they let out a series of exclamations. "Dad, it's Yu Qing." Ren Xia, who was standing in the private room, was also astonished. He wasn't the only one. The other people in the private room were also astonished. No one expected the little girl in the private room to suddenly rush into the arena and play a few rounds with the player. Ren Xia and Ren Wanyan were even more astonished. That was the former's cousin and the latter's niece. After the replay was repeatedly replayed in slow motion, the commentator finally stopped repeating what happened in the arena and talked about another matter. Who was that little girl? How strong was she? Not only him, but everyone inside and outside the arena was also curious about this matter. The little girl's movements were really too fast. If the replay wasn't played in slow motion, it was almost impossible to see her figure clearly. Even a manual expert couldn't match her speed. Above the profound level. But how old was she? Looking at her height and appearance, she seemed to be no more than 7 or 8 years old. The immaturity and childlike expression on her face also indicated that this girl was definitely not old. She might even be younger than she looked. Because a 7 or 8-year-old child already knew a lot of things, he shouldn't be able to do such a thing. Even if he was 7 or 8 years old, his strength above the mystic stage was enough to shock people. Also, who was that bald man just now? Also above the profound level. Xiaoling, how are you feeling? The coach asked with concern. I'm fine. Lu Xiaoling looked depressed. Not only was she depressed, but she was almost depressed. After such a huge incident, he actually subconsciously swapped a few beats with the other party. And then he was hit in the face by a little girl. Everything that had just happened made her start to doubt her life. She had no doubt that what had happened tonight had made her a laughingstock. Ren Baqin gritted his teeth as he grabbed Lu Hua and left the arena. Royal father, why are you leaving? It's fun. Lu Hua was still a little nostalgic about the things he had just played and didn't realize how big of a mistake he had made. Ren Baqin took out the phone from his pocket, pressed it, and an old man appeared in the air. Was that your daughter just now? The old man on the screen was Yang Sen from the Messier 87 department. He was startled and smiled bitterly. In fact, he already knew who Ren Baqin was when he saw him. Sorry, the child isn't sensible. Ren Baqin's veins were bulging on his forehead. In the past, he hated it when parents said, the child isn't sensible. However, it was his turn to say this sentence now. This time, we've really made a big mess. It has already been broadcast to the whole world. What are you going to do? Yang Sen smiled bitterly. Go home and beat the child. Do you want to see it? Ren Baqin gritted his teeth. Forget it. You don't show your face much anyway. This storm will subside after a while, Yang Sen quickly said. Ren Baqin hung up the phone with a black face, and 2 old men appeared in the air. Was that Yi Qing just now? Ren Baqin's parents were tongue-tied. You don't even recognize your granddaughter? We were shocked when we saw her on TV just now. Mama Ren asked worriedly, what should we do about such a big matter? Don't worry, it's a small matter. Ren Baqin tried to look relaxed. You don't have to worry. How can it be a small matter? Papa Ren raised his voice. Ren Baqin was right. In some ways, it was indeed a small matter. There was very little information about him in the outside world, and it didn't matter even if it was dug out. Would he care? Besides, she had only interrupted a competition. At the national level, this was indeed a very small matter. At most, such an accident would make some people look bad. To put it more seriously, it would damage the country's image. However, with her strength, anyone with a brain would be able to conclude that it was very difficult to stop her. Therefore, the damage to the country's image was just a simple sentence. Thinking about it this way, Ren Baqin felt that it was indeed a small matter. He had never taught Hua, and she didn't know what the Olympics was. Could she be forgiven for committing such a crime? However, he still wanted to beat her up. After comforting his parents, Ren Baqin felt Hua tugging at his clothes. Father, did I do something wrong? Hua seemed to feel that something was wrong and looked up at Ren Baqin pitifully. What do you think? Ren Baqin's face darkened. I don't know. Hua looked puzzled. I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't sneak out or steal wine to drink. At the thought of this, Hua straightened her back and said solemnly, Father, I didn't do anything wrong. You can't beat me up. The Empress said that you will only be beaten if you make a mistake. Renbachien immediately laughed in his heart. With a cold face, he carried Hua to the car and went straight to the hotel. On the way, he received a number of calls, from the higher-ups of this year to Ning Kaichin, Ren Wanyan, Ding Jia, Qin Qing. Many of them even comforted Renbachien. The higher-ups of this year's Olympic Games only mentioned what happened in the competition and praised Hua's strength. However, all this couldn't change the fact that Hua would be beaten up today. After much difficulty, they finally returned to the hotel. A moment later, a tragic chase took place in the hotel. Hua's buttocks were swollen after Renbachien slapped him twice. Although Hua was indeed very sturdy, Renbachien was also an earth will expert and had specially practiced the yang boosting technique, so his body was tyrannical. Next, Hua began to run around the room while crying. He tore down half of the hotel floor. While Renbachien was tearing down the hotel and beating up the kid, the storm of the sudden incident in the competition was still brewing. The internet was almost exploding. Almost everyone was discussing what happened just now. Even those who didn't watch the competition went to watch the video and joined in the discussion. Among the three hottest topics, the first was the identity of the girl. The second was the strength of the girl. The third was the confession. This was actually the most popular topic. After all, Hua's appearance was like that of the Empress. She was exquisite, beautiful, and had a bit of heroic spirit. Although she didn't have the icy temperament of the Empress, she gave people a weird feeling. Renbachien had unknowingly become the father-in-law of the nation. Baidu Search 881 Chinese website. No advertising words. Chapter 1021. After tearing down half of the hotel, Renbachien had to bring Hua back to the villa in Xishan in the middle of the night. He originally thought that the hotel would be closer to the competition, but it seemed like it was a good thing that the villa wouldn't be torn down. Although he rarely came here, he and the Empress had lived here for a long time, so he cherished this villa. If Hua tore down this villa, she would probably be beaten up a few more times. Renbachien didn't change his room, so he got someone to clean up another room for Hua. Hua was full of energy again in the time it took to get from the hotel to the villa. She started yelling and running around the house. She had always been more energetic than ordinary children. In terms of noise, she had the fighting power of 10 naughty children. In terms of demolishing a house, she was equivalent to strengthening a company. However, what gave Renbachien the biggest headache was that she didn't have a good memory. It wasn't easy for her to remember for 3 days, and most of the time, she only had a memory of 3 minutes. Just like now. Father, what's this? Father, this is so beautiful. Father, can I hold this? Father, is this delicious? Can I try it? Put that grenade down. Renbachien was getting a headache from her noise and really wanted to pick her up and give her another beating. He and the Empress weren't noisy people, so he didn't expect their child to be so noisy. Before going to bed, Renbachien used the Internet Access Device, a device that could project images into the air, to take a look online. Sure enough, there were reports and discussions about Hua everywhere. As for today's Olympic competition, no one mentioned it. Renbachien rubbed his head, listened to the rummaging sounds in the supermarket, and chased Hua back to her room to sleep. A few minutes after he went back to his room, he heard Honeysuckle's footsteps in front of the door. In the darkness, he could see half of Honeysuckle's face sticking out of the door frame. It was completely blocked by his hair, and it was quite scary in the dark. Father, I can't sleep alone. Hua pouted. Didn't you sleep alone in Wuji City? Renbachien sat up and said angrily. Hua was speechless. She rolled her eyes and said in a timid tone, I'm a stranger. This pillow is too unfamiliar. Renbochin twitched his mouth, sighed, and patted the place beside him. Sleep here, don't mess around. All right. Honeysuckle cheered and jumped onto the bed. Father, can you tell me a story? Honeysuckle couldn't stay still for more than a few minutes. His eyes were shining in the dark. Renbochin looked at her expectant gaze, thought for a while, and said, "Let me tell you a story about Calabash Brothers and Snow White. A long, long time ago, an old man planted a calabash vine. Just like that, Calabash Brothers defeated Snow White and lived a happy life with Baldy Chang." After Renbochin finished telling the story, there was no more sound around him. He turned his head and saw that Honeysuckle had fallen asleep with his arms and legs spread out. I finally fell asleep. Renbochin felt a headache coming on. In fact, at the Earth-Will level, the need for water was much less than that of an ordinary person. 2 hours a day was enough. However, Honeysuckle still needed more sleep. Sleeping was also a time for her to absorb the power in her body. He closed his eyes and entered his knowledge sea. At this time, there was an additional laboratory on the planet. There were all kinds of equipment inside. A large number of computers were placed inside, all of which were turned on. Although this place belonged to him alone, he still made it look like it was his own. He first checked the data on the computer and then opened another door. It was a room that covered an area of thousands of square meters. There were huge pipes and equipment everywhere. In the middle of the room was a round metal device that was erected vertically. It was a nuclear reactor. That's right, Renbochin was making nuclear bombs in his own world with the nuclear technology that he had obtained. It should be said that Renbochin was in his own world, using unlimited resources and thinking to control everything in the entire world to deduce Earth's technology. Now, in his mind, some of the technologies had been deduced to around the year 2000. Of course, he had only mastered a few of the more important technologies. As for the equipment, he used the principles and blueprints to make them directly. He would leave these things to the people of Dayo. He wasn't going to take these technologies out directly. He was only using this method to imprint some things in his mind and make the advancement of Dayo's technology a little easier. After staying in his mind for 4 hours, Renbochin returned to the real world and felt a small foot suddenly appear on his waist. Bang! Renbochin was kicked into the wall. He turned to look at Erhua, who was sleeping soundly on the bed and drooling on half the pillow. This sleeping posture wasn't like his or the Empress's, but more like Lin Chaola's. Renbochin simply lay on the floor and slept. He was a little tired from staying in his sea of knowledge for 4 hours, so he fell asleep soon after. While half asleep, Renbochin realized that it was daybreak. Erhua sat up at the head of the bed and rubbed her sleepy eyes. She looked around and quickly found Renbochin lying on the floor. She immediately laughed. "Father, father." Erhua moved, squatted on Renbochin's stomach, and pulled his face. "Stop fooling around." Renbochin pushed her hands away and said without opening his eyes, "Go get dressed and wash up. I will check you later." "Oh." Honeysuckle pouted and stepped out of the door. She was squatting on Renbochin's stomach. This sudden action almost made Renbochin spit out a mouthful of blood. Erhua. Renbochin's face turned green as he jumped up from the floor. Where was Erhua? Suppressing the urge to beat her up again, Renbochin washed up first, leaned against the headboard, and turned on the internet. Sure enough, most of the news that he saw was about Erhua. He also saw a bunch of people calling him father-in-law. Renbochin smacked his lips. If someone could really marry Erhua, there was no chance. Erhua was the next emperor of Dayo. She might even become the emperor in the future. Just like the emperor in the history of that world. With Erhua's talent, it wasn't impossible. Soon, the corner of Renbochin's eyes twitched. If others saw this, they would realize that they had the same expression as the Empress when she wanted to kill someone. However, Renbochin didn't have that kind of thought at this moment. He was just a little surprised. His identity had actually been dug out by someone. Primary school, middle school, high school, university, and that year's work history. Of course, the most eye-catching one was the director of the Dayo Dojo. Baidu searched for the novel website of Yunlai Pavilion, allowing you to experience the latest and fastest novel chapters. All novels were updated in seconds. Chapter 1022. Not only did they dig out his identity, but they also pointed out that there were many Earth-class experts in Dayo Martial Arts School. Although there were hundreds of Earth-class experts in Dayo Martial Arts School, no more than 10 of them were known to the public. Even so, it still caused a heated discussion. One had to know that in China, an Earth-rank martial artist was just a legend. According to the news, the person who leaked his identity claimed to be his classmate, and it wasn't just one person. The informant put all the information together to form this piece of news. Although the name wasn't mentioned, Renbochin knew that the informant was probably his classmate. After all, there were a few things in the news that he only remembered after reading this article. However, it didn't matter. Calculating his age, his classmate should be in his 50s by now. Renbochin's face darkened as he continued to flip through the news. There were some statements in the news that were out of his expectations. When martial arts are in the hands of a few people, it becomes the gap between the nobles and the commoners. We are not born equal. There were many posts on the internet, accusing some people of holding martial arts in their hands and forming the gap between the new generation of nobles and the commoners. Some people were born with powerful martial arts and reached the earth class at a young age. As for ordinary people, they learned ordinary martial arts released by the country and had to join the army or a functional department to learn more advanced martial arts. In summary, they were chasing after the shadows of others for their whole life. Just like the ordinary people in ancient times, they didn't even have the opportunity to learn. It was the same for martial arts. The descendants of ordinary people didn't even have the opportunity to see those advanced martial arts. There was a huge gap between them and others from birth. These kinds of comments actually appeared quite a lot in one night. On the surface, it was referring to the two flowers that appeared in the Olympics, but in fact, all the martial arts were released by the country. The purpose was clear. In addition, there was another kind of comment that added fuel to the fire. There was a huge gap between experts and ordinary people. Experts could break the rules at will, just like the girl who appeared in the competition. Ordinary people couldn't even see her figure clearly. Would the country have the ability to stop and arrest such people after they committed crimes? Would the country use the law to restrain and punish such powerful martial artists? As long as one was strong enough, they could break the rules. Coupled with the previous statement that some people were born with high-level cultivation techniques, they were completely separated from ordinary people by an invisible wall. Boss, you can open a kindergarten yourself. The assistant on the screen was slightly surprised and said with a smile. When Renbochin heard this answer, he smacked his head. He had forgotten about this simplest method. What about the students? I don't want Erhua to be the only one in the kindergarten. Boss, many of the students in the martial arts center have children. Just let them send their children to kindergarten. Renbochin suddenly saw the light. The students in his martial arts center were still relatively reliable. After all, their follow-up martial arts were all in the martial arts center. Furthermore, the martial arts center had nurtured them for so many years and was extremely powerful. As a result, they were very united. Erhua and their offspring would go to kindergarten together, and the teachers in the kindergarten would be arranged by Renbochin. Naturally, there wouldn't be any problems. Go and make the arrangements. As soon as possible. As for the location, there are still many empty floors in the building. Find a floor for the kindergarten. Renbochin directly threw the matter to the assistant. Once this matter was resolved, other things didn't matter anymore. Father, where are we going to play today? Erhua had changed her clothes and appeared in front of Renbochin bouncing around. She looked very cheerful, and her eyes were full of anticipation. She had completely forgotten what she had just done. Come, let's play bamboo stir-fried meat first. Renbochin smiled kindly. He hadn't forgotten that she had used his stomach as a bed just now. For the next few days, Renbochin would still bring Erhua to the competition. However, this time, he had to dress her up a little. He changed her into a blue sportswear. In addition, he had informed some departments to arrange a more secluded location, so the cameras wouldn't capture this place. Although the internet was still abuzz, it didn't affect him at all when he brought Erhua to watch the competition. Men's 100 meters, 4.7 seconds. Women's 100 meters, 4.6 seconds. Men's shot put, 66.4 meters. Women's shot put, 64.2 meters. Men's weightlifting, 368 kilograms in the snatch, 437 kilograms in the clean and jerk. It could be said that this year's Olympic Games had completely exceeded the limits of mankind. Through this year's Olympic Games, everyone could see what the human body could achieve. However, this was only the Xian level. Above the Xian level, there was the Earth level and the Heaven level. People had already guessed the strength of the Earth level based on the video of Erhua and Renbochin breaking into the competition. Instantaneous burst of power, within 1.5 seconds of 100 meters. Of course, a strong individual wasn't omnipotent. The national football team was eliminated in the first round. The whole nation was shocked. Baidu search 081 Chinese network yen. No advertising message. Chapter 1023. Chao Wenji left the martial arts field with sweat all over his body. He returned to his room to take a shower and change his clothes. Then, he turned on the internet. News and pictures appeared one after another. He ignored them and just pulled up a short video from his personal folder. A girl in an ancient costume with a delicate appearance and a little baby fat on her face descended from the sky. She snatched the racket from an athlete's hand and pushed her away with her other hand. Then, with an excited look on her face, she hit the ping-pong ball that bounced off the table. After hitting 3 balls in a row, another strong bald man descended. He carried her and disappeared from the stands in a flash. The whole process took no more than 4 seconds. He had watched this short video hundreds of times. Chao Wenji's eyes were full of unwillingness. He had worked so hard, but she was still stronger than him. The difference was like heaven and earth. She was clearly younger than him. I will definitely be stronger than her. Chao Wenji clenched his fist and said to himself. After watching the video a few more times, Chao Wenji finally closed it. His eyes were filled with indifference and disdain as he swept a few glances at the clamorous discussion about cultivation methods are only in the hands of a few people. A group of incompetent losers who expect others to grant them fairness. Because of this, you will always be at the bottom of society, always looking up to the glory of others. Although he didn't pay much attention, he knew what the ultimate goal of these people was. They wanted the country to take out all the cultivation methods. Ridiculous, childish thinking, the wailing of a defeated dog. There was never equality in this world. In school, some people were short, some people were tall. Some people were ugly, some people were beautiful. Some people were rich, some people were ordinary. They were destined to be unequal from birth. In school, some people were good at studying, some people were bad at studying. Some people were good at language, some people were good at math. This was also unequal. It wasn't the gap brought about by studying. It was the innate gap between individuals. Therefore, the extravagant hope of equality was a laughable thing. Moreover, even if the country really took out the cultivation methods, did they think they would be the ones who benefited? Did they think they could achieve the same results just because they had the same cultivation methods? Ridiculous. The ones who benefited were those countries that had tried everything but couldn't get it. Now, they were eyeing it covetously. Did those wailing people really not understand something that even he could understand? They just didn't want to believe that they were mediocre. They were just desperate for their own situation, but they couldn't afford to pay any price, so they used this childish method to give themselves a little more hope in life, or rather, an excuse. Chow Wenji finished the breakfast full of meat. According to the previous healthcare system, this kind of breakfast was definitely not good for the body. I'm going to school. Chow Wenji put the plate aside and wiped his mouth with a handkerchief. Wenji. The dignified middle-aged man on the other side of the table called out to him. This was his father, Chow Yuzhou, who was also a famous entrepreneur in the country. Someone must have invited you, right? Have you made up your mind? Chow Yuzhou asked indifferently. Before the Olympics, there was a very important event. The National Youth Virtual Fighting Competition. It was carried out through one of new century's most famous virtual games, Theon. This was a game that could constantly measure the user's personal strength and condition. The virtual fighting competition had been held for more than 15 years and was now one of the most famous competitions in the world. He, on the other hand, was ranked third in the Chinese under-15 tournament. In other words, he was ranked third among all the 15-year-old boys and girls in the country. It was a result that was worthy of pride. However, Chow Wenji's face turned gloomy when he thought of that match. The top three were all within his expectations. However, he had lost to someone he shouldn't have lost to. That weak and incompetent last-place student since he was young. Chow Wenji felt a burst of anger whenever he thought of that timid face. That guy was so strong, and he lost to him. He couldn't accept it. Despite his gloominess, Chow Wenji didn't forget to answer his father's question. The best is not here yet. After saying that, he turned around and left. The people from the Armed Forces Command aren't here yet. Chow Yuzhou understood. With Wenji's strength, the Armed Forces Command was the most suitable for him. Although the military was not bad, there was still a gap between them and the Armed Forces Command in terms of high-end strength and techniques. When he arrived at school, Chow Wenji ignored the many students who were staring at him. He was already used to this kind of gaze. He came from a wealthy family, had great talent, and was good-looking. It could be said that he was one of the most admired people in this private school. It should be noted that although the students in this private school came from good families, there were still different levels of wealth. Coupled with the last two factors, the gap was even wider. It was just that he was always cold and unapproachable. In contrast, there was another person who was much more approachable. Hey, the third most powerful student in the world is here. A young man greeted him with a smile. Chow Wenji stopped in his tracks and looked over coldly. Ren Xia, are you mocking me? How can that be? I can't be more envious. This is the third most powerful student in the world. If I had such strength, my father would be satisfied. Ren Xia said with a grin. Another high-profile student in this school was Ren Xia. His father was Ren Wanyan, one of the richest people in the country and in the world. Get lost. Chow Wenji's face darkened. Ren Xia had always been low-key, but he wasn't much weaker than Ren Xia. However, Ren Xia hated him very much, and he had just dropped to the second most hated person in the list. What she hated the most was that he always did everything skillfully and easily, and that he could get along with anyone. He always made Ren Xia feel that he was a hypocrite. You are still so irritable. I should call you Exploding Chow instead. Ren Xiao laughed nonchalantly. Chow Wenji gritted his teeth and asked, do you want to fight now? Forget it, I am no match for you. Ren Xiao smiled and took a few steps back. Chow Wenji entered the school building with a cold face and met the yes man he hated the most in the corridor. It was Xiang Yang. Upon seeing Ren Xiao, Xiang Yang quickly stepped aside. Chow Wenji stopped in front of him, turned his head, and looked at him coldly. I didn't expect you to hide so well. No. Xiang Yang's face changed. He wanted to explain, but he was a little hesitant and his words were a little unclear. Don't make that disgusting look. Chow Wenji looked at him with disgust and walked away coldly. During the morning classes, Chow Wenji was called to the principal's office. This is Chow Wenji, whom you are looking for. The principal smiled and said to the two sitting on the sofa. You can talk. Then, he left the room, leaving the three of them in the room. Both of them were in their 30s and looked very capable. When they looked at Chow Wenji, there was undisguised admiration in their eyes. We watched your match. It was very exciting, which is rare for someone your age. Don't you know how to introduce yourselves? Chow Wenji said coldly. What a hot-tempered little guy. One of them said, we are from the Armed Forces Command. We want to invite you to join the Armed Forces Command after graduation. This is our intention. The Armed Forces Command has a high school directly under it, which will provide the best education. Of course, there is also the best martial arts. I don't need to say more. Joining the Armed Forces Command is the best for your future. The coldness in Chow Wenji's eyes faded a little. The other party was right. They were the ones he had been waiting for. It was said that in order to balance some departments, the Armed Forces Command was the last to send an invitation when inviting seedlings of suitable age. If he refused other invitations and didn't get an invitation from the Armed Forces Command, he would have to wait for another year. Therefore, apart from those who had absolute confidence like him, many people would choose to accept an invitation first. For example, the military or other functional departments. Your classmate has agreed to our invitation. It is said that you two have known each other since you were young. I think it will be easy for you to blend in when you arrive in Wuji City, the other person said with a smile. Chow Wenji, who had been feeling a little relaxed, suddenly narrowed his eyes. His expression also turned ugly. Xiang Yang. Yes. You know each other since kindergarten, right? The person who spoke still didn't understand why his expression was a little off. Then, I refuse. Chow Wenji said coldly and turned to leave. When he turned around, his eyes were full of anger. They actually invited that damn guy first before inviting him. Which guy was more important in their eyes? Baidu search 881 Chinese network yen. No advertising words. Chapter 1024. Chow Wenji clenched his fists tightly with one hand and closed the door with the other, shutting out the series of why. You've been waiting for us all this time, and you'd better think about it again. I will enter the military. Even in the military, there are enough cultivation techniques. I will definitely surpass that damned guy. Of course, there are others. Chow Wenji said in a low voice with anger in his heart. There seemed to be flames burning in his eyes. Chow Wenji returned to the classroom in silence. No one knew that he had rejected the Armed Forces Command, which no one could refuse. No one knew what kind of future he was thinking about. But at night, after school, he was stopped again. There's something I need to discuss with you. Ren Xiao appeared in front of him and extended an invitation. There was no longer a fixed smile on his face. There was a trace of sincerity in his eyes. Because of this, Chao Wenji did not get angry and followed him to the rooftop without saying a word. Although Chao Wenji disliked him, the other party was a genius with the same talent as him. After the other party removed that smile and pretentiousness, Chao Wenji also wanted to hear what he had to say. "Tell me, what's the matter?" Chao Wenji asked when they reached the rooftop. "I'm here to invite you on behalf of someone else," Ren Xia said seriously. "Who?" "My uncle." Chao Wenji's eyes were filled with doubt when he suddenly recalled a rumor he had heard recently. He knew that it was not a rumor. Dayo Martial Arts School. Chao Wenji thought of the young girl and the bald man in the video. "Not bad." Ren Xia smiled. "My uncle praised you and said you're not bad." Then, he said enviously, "Even my uncle has never praised me like this." After saying that, he spread his hands and said, "Well, actually, I rarely see my uncle." "Who is that girl?" What Ren Xia wanted to ask was not this, but how old the girl was and how strong she was. "My cousin." "You don't have to think about it anymore. That's a true genius. She was born with Earth-rank strength." Speaking of her cousin, Ren Xia was really envious. Other people's lifelong pursuits, she had them all the moment she was born. Wealth, power, status, strength, beauty, she had no shortcomings. If there was any shortcoming, it was probably that his brain wasn't that good. Ahem, it's not good to think that way. However, although his cousin was very smart at times, most of the time she was extremely childish, so childish that it was scary. Perhaps this was the price. When Ren Xia thought of this, she felt much better. Everyone knows that the Armed Forces Command is the department with the most martial arts manuals and the most complete training of talents. Ren Xia's tone changed. In fact, the Dayo Martial Arts School is the department. Most people knew that the Dayo Martial Arts Center was very powerful, but they didn't know how powerful it was. If you accept the invitation, you will have the opportunity to see those who are truly powerful. Chao Wenji opened his mouth and said, 5 years before the nation announced the martial arts manuals, the Dayo Martial Arts Club had already appeared. Furthermore, there were Xian-level experts in it. Of course, this was only speculation based on the video at that time. In fact, Dayo Martial Arts School already had an Earth-class expert at that time. After so many years, with the improvement of the strength of the people, the popularity of Dayo martial arts centers was no longer the same as it was in the past. However, this was only in the eyes of ordinary people. In fact, the best bodyguards in the world still came from Dayo's dojo. It was said that the disciples of the dojo could go back to study after being bodyguards for 5 years. Some people wanted to hire those disciples from the dojo at a high price, but they were all rejected. Ren Xia smiled. Just like what Chao Wenji said, ordinary people didn't know about this, but it wasn't a secret among the rich and powerful. So, what's your answer? What kind of treatment will I receive if I go? Chao Wenji asked after remaining silent for a while. The disciples of Dayo Martial Arts Club were divided into many levels. The lowest level was naturally the outer disciples, who could learn by paying tuition fees. As for the next level, they would be inner court disciples. These disciples were promoted from the outer disciples. Any higher level was the core disciple. In the past, a Dayo Martial Arts Club would find talented seedlings from outside and directly recruit them as inner disciples or even core disciples. However, in recent years, there were fewer and fewer people who were directly recruited as inner disciples, not to mention core disciples. Above them, there seemed to be another level. It was said that in Dayo Martial Arts Club, core disciples were the real disciples. Chao Wenji wanted to know what level of disciple he would be after he went in. Inner disciple. Ren Xia understood what he was thinking. Although uncle praised you, you can only be an inner disciple at the moment. However, with your strength, it is only a matter of time before you become a core disciple. As for higher levels, it will depend on your merits. Merits? Chao Wenji repeated softly. Seeing that Ren Xia had no intention of explaining, he didn't ask further. Although you will be an inner disciple, I can say that you won't regret it. Ren Xia said. Chao Wenji was silent for a while. Being an inner disciple didn't satisfy him, but it wasn't unacceptable. I want to meet the master of Dayo Martial Arts Club and ask him a few questions. If possible, I will accept it, Chao Wenji said after thinking for a while. Dayo Martial Arts Club was more suitable for him than the military. The reason why he didn't consider it before was that the military had invited him and he would be valued more if he went. Secondly, Dayo Martial Arts Club had many branches. If he went, he would only become an outer disciple of one of the branches. He wasn't sure when he would become an inner disciple or a higher level disciple. If he was delayed for a few years, he would fall behind others, which he couldn't accept. Now that Ren Xia had issued an invitation on behalf of Dayo Martial Arts Club, this was an opportunity. I will help you ask, but I don't know if my uncle will agree. Ren Xia smiled bitterly. I can't make the decision on this matter. Ren Xia smiled bitterly. In fact, he didn't only praise Chao Wenji, but also the group of young experts who were in the top 10. Furthermore, the invitation from Dayo Martial Arts School wasn't from Ren Baqin. It was Ding Jie's idea. Of course, Ren Xia couldn't tell him about this. That night, after he received the call, he agreed without hesitation. In fact, Dayo Martial Arts Club had been restricted in its recruitment. Otherwise, Ding Jie would have caught all of those young geniuses in one fell swoop. However, this was China, after all, and the club couldn't go too far. You snatched away those budding talents and let the country accept those who were left behind. Once or twice was fine, but if this went on, how could the country endure it? Furthermore, he was very interested in the young people on Earth. He had to admit that although Earth didn't have the unique environment of that world, there were many geniuses on Earth. Earth had a population of more than 6 billion people. China alone had a population of 1.2 billion, which was 3 times that of the total human population in that world. A huge population base, advanced technology, a good life, and a large amount of knowledge that everyone could master allowed Earth to produce a large number of geniuses. For example, he watched videos of competitions when he was bored. Some of the young practitioners who could reach the man-will level at the age of 15 or 16 could even reach the earth-will level in that world. Although he couldn't bring them to that world, they would still become his strength in this world. Therefore, he didn't mind taking some time out to meet this genius that his nephew highly admired. P.S. This is from a friend, Fate chat group. Fate, who doesn't have a living characteristic in this world, has formed a chat group. Everyone in the group is Fate, has nice words, and knows how to contribute selflessly. I love it here. The quality of the top authors is guaranteed. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 1025. Chao Wenji looked up at the towering building and felt a little nervous, which was rare. Given his family background, he had seen many big shots. However, this person was completely different from those big shots he had seen before. He was surrounded by the brightly lit Wuji city. The current Wuji city was no longer as deserted as it used to be. The 5 million permanent residents were the reason why the threshold for entering Wuji city had been raised. Every 3 minutes, there would be an aircraft flying across the sky. Thanks to the great power of the Armed Forces Command, this city, which was filled with geniuses and experts from all over the country, was not chaotic. Although there were many disputes, they were all under certain rules. In terms of public security, it was much better than in most cities nowadays. Of course, these were not issues that he cared about. This was the most prosperous area in Wuji City, surrounded by all kinds of high-end hotels, shopping malls, hospitals, and restaurants. In the middle of all these was the headquarters of the Dayo Martial Arts Centers. The building was called Deep Pool in Wuji City. Or rather, Dragon Pool. Dragon Pool and Tiger Denver. Everyone in Wuji City knew how terrifying the Dayo Martial Arts Centers were. After all, there were many Earth-class experts exuding a terrifying aura coming in and out of the building every day. For example, there were 3 burly men wearing baggy pants and singlets walking out of the building now. Their exposed limbs were covered with horrible scars, and they exuded a terrifying aura like that of a ferocious beast from head to toe. He had seen Earth-class experts before, but the pressure he felt from them was far less than that of the 3 men in front of him. They were like ferocious beasts that chose to devour people. Just one look at them would send chills down one's spine. Ren Xia, who was beside him, took a step forward and cupped his hands respectfully. Teacher Shigu, Teacher Shan Kuei, Teacher Tai Shu. Hey, it's the little guy from the boss's family. The 3 men glanced at him and laughed. Let's go drink. Without waiting for him to say anything, they picked him up and walked out. Ren Xia was scared out of his wits. How would he dare to drink with them? If he drank with others, he would be drinking with them. They were a group of ruthless people who could beat the drums and pass flowers with grenades. He said, I still have something to discuss with Uncle. Uncle is waiting for me upstairs. Oh, the lady boss wants to see you. The burly man who was grabbing him sounded regretful. Recently, your father hasn't come to drink with us. Ren Xia cursed in her heart, wasn't it because I drank with you last time and ended up in the hospital? Where did that Ding Jia kid go? Last time, he went to the hospital with his father and stayed for 2 more days. After he was discharged, he ran away in a hurry. I think he went to look for Auntie Ning. I heard that Uncle Ding Jia has been chasing after Auntie Ning for more than 10 years. Ren Xia pondered. When the other party placed him on the ground, he quickly took a few steps back. I'm going to pay my respects to Big Uncle now. Next time, I'll bring gifts to meet the teachers. Go, go. The 3 big men smiled and waved their hands. They put their arms around each other's shoulders and got into a car that had been waiting for a long time by the roadside. Only then did Ren Xia heave a sigh of relief. He wiped the sweat off his forehead and looked like he had just survived a disaster. Are you afraid of them? Ren Xia said calmly. In his heart, he felt that this was normal. Even if such a terrifying person stood in front of them, they would feel pressured. I'm not afraid, I'm afraid of drinking with them. Ren Xia corrected. You'll know when there's a chance in the future. After thinking about it, he still warned this classmate. Although Big Uncle has already strictly ordered them not to drink with students, there's always a chance. I mean, if they ask you to drink with them, don't go. Chao Wenji turned his head to look at Ren Xia's especially serious face. Although he did not understand, he accepted his good intentions. I understand. Remember. All right, let's go up. Who are they? Nominally, they're the instructors of the dojo, but they really don't have any talent in teaching. Of course, their strength is unquestionable. It can be said that they're terrifying. Even if they're all Earth-rank martial artists, they can fight 1 against 2, or even 3. Then the lady boss is. Chao Wenji felt a little strange. From what they said, it seemed that they were referring to Ren Xia's uncle. Just as you guessed, it's my uncle. Ren Xia smiled. Although he himself did not understand the situation of his uncle's family, it was really a very funny thing for such a fierce uncle to be called the lady boss. In his heart, his uncle was very mysterious. He was very indifferent to everything and always gave him a feeling that he was a bystander, looking at everything in the world with cold eyes. However, his uncle seemed to be a henpecked man. Cough cough. This matter could not be said. They took the elevator to the 6th floor, which was the Deo Dojo. Dozens of students were doing various exercises at the side of the field. Of course, this was not all. In fact, the dojo occupied a total of 3 floors. There were many training fields of various sizes. This was just a place similar to the front desk. Even so, the muscles on Chao Wenji's face twitched slightly when he saw everything in the field. Among the dozens of people, most of them were people whose strength he could not see through. Among them, there were 2 people who had an undisguised terrifying aura. Earth rank. It should be said that there were 4 Earth rank martial artists. Other than the 2 Earth rank martial artists in the field, there were 2 other men who had the same terrifying aura as the 3 people he met before standing in front of another elevator. Teacher Xiong, I have an appointment with my uncle. Ren Xia brought Chao Wenji to greet the 2 before entering the elevator. What are they doing? Chao Wenji's heart trembled a little. Those were Earth rank martial artists. Were they watching the elevator? Were they like security guards or doormen guarding the elevator? Just like what you see. Ren Xia understood his feelings very well. An Earth rank martial artist who was admired by countless people and received courteous treatment from the Armed Forces Command and the military as a doorman was probably the only place where such a sensational thing could happen. Chao Wenji felt as if his heart had been hit by a sledgehammer. Don't think too much. The situation here is a little special. Ren Xia was afraid that he would be shocked and have the idea that he was trying his best to reach Earth rank just to be a doorman, so she kindly explained. I know. Chao Wenji took a deep breath. He did not want to show his wavering emotions in front of this schoolmate. Furthermore, it was very difficult for him to accept being comforted by others, even if the other party had good intentions. However, from the moment he entered the door until now, he had already discovered a lot of things. It was completely different from what he had imagined in the past. And the strength of the other party had far exceeded his expectations. He began to subconsciously guess what kind of person he was about to meet. There were too few records about him in the outside world. It was as if a hand had erased everything about him. More than half of his experiences were blank. What could be found now were things that happened before he was 25 years old, as well as a few arrest warrants. One was a domestic arrest warrant for the destruction of a family involved in the underworld in S-City 30 years ago. The other was an arrest warrant issued by the US more than 20 years ago. Other than that, it was all blank. This was a very mysterious person. From the 2 arrest warrants and the brief glimpse in the video, he should be a very vicious person. The elevator went straight to the top floor. After the elevator door opened, there was a huge living room. 2 people were sitting on the sofa talking. From their angle, they could see a man in a bathrobe, bald, and without eyebrows. He looked to be around 30 years old, but according to the information, he should be 56 years old. His figure was very strong, similar to the few people they had seen earlier. However, he gave off a different feeling. He didn't feel like he was facing a ferocious beast. Instead, he had the imposing manner of a superior. In addition to these 2 people, there was a young girl walking on the back of the sofa with her arms spread out as if she was walking on a tightrope. When he saw her, Chao Wenji's pupils shrank. It was the young girl in the video. Before he came, he heard from Ren Xia that she was 9 years old. However, it didn't matter how old she was since she was born with the strength of an Earth-level expert. Uncle. Yu Qing. Ren Xia greeted first, took a few steps forward, and smiled. Aunt Ning is actually here. Ren Xia also saw the side profile of the person who turned around. She was one of the most famous actresses in the country, Ning Kaichin. She had excellent looks, outstanding acting skills, a deep background, and no scandals. Why was she here? According to Ren Xia, she seemed to be very familiar with him. He looked at the two of them and smiled. You are here. Have a seat. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 1026. Every time someone calls me auntie, my heart. Ning Kaichin covered her mouth and chuckled. It felt weird to call herself auntie, but she usually only addressed herself this way in front of Renbochin. Auntie Ning is still young, but seniority can't be influenced by age. Otherwise, it will be a mismatch, Ren Xia said honestly. Others only knew that Ning Kaichin was a famous movie star. If she hadn't slacked off, she would have achieved more than what she had today. However, not many people knew that she also had a superb swordsmanship that made people gasp in amazement. Your words always attract people's attention. Ning Kaichin chuckled and said to Renbochin, I'll take my leave first. Go ahead, Renbochin said faintly. Ning Kaichin had done better than he had expected on Earth over the years. More than 400 scholars had been sent back to Deo, and it was difficult to expand for the time being. After all, with so many scholars over the years, there were already people eyeing them. Apart from that, her secondary job was unexpected. She actually became the top female star in the country. Moreover, she liked the feeling of being the center of attention and never got tired of it over the years. On the contrary, money wasn't in her consideration. Little princess, I'll bring you a gift next time, Ning Kaichin said to Hua, who had jumped from the back of the sofa to the cabinet. Okay. Hua nodded in agreement with a gleam in her eyes. She loved gifts the most. Let's go, little fellow. Ning Kaichin patted Ren Xia's shoulder and swayed away. Hua, stop fooling around. Renbochin clapped his hands. Hua had never stopped being restless and couldn't stay still. A 3-year-old child with an overabundance of energy made it impossible for anyone to criticize him. When Renbochin was at this age, he also broke the windows of his neighbor's house, threw dead rats in front of his neighbor's house, and even stole the old hen that laid eggs when he went to watch TV in winter. Therefore, according to Renbochin's parents, this was inherited. Oh. Hua responded and appeared on Ren Xia's neck in a flash. She put her legs on his shoulders, held his head with her 2 small hands, and asked excitedly, Is there a gift? Yes, how could I forget my cousin's gift? Ren Xia quickly replied. Hua. Renbochin frowned. Although she was only 3 years old, she didn't have any etiquette at all. When she returned, she would be given lessons on royal etiquette. It's okay. Cousin is still young. It's the time for her to play. Ren Xia smiled. Although he was only 9 years old, 9 years old wasn't that young. Normal children wouldn't be like this when they were 9 years old. As a successor, he should be much stronger than his peers at this age. But his cousin's sister was the complete opposite. She was much worse than ordinary children. I heard that she hasn't even gone to school yet. Big Uncle's education of her is really worrying. Was there really nothing wrong with his cousin's brain? Chao Wenji was also thinking in his mind. This girl had just appeared on Ren Xiao's shoulder, and he had not even noticed how she had appeared. What a powerful strength. But this girl was a little strange, so childish. Also, the name, 2 Flowers, it's so old-fashioned. It's hard to believe that someone would give their daughter such a name in this day and age. How much hatred does he have? Renbochin sized up the young man sitting in front of him. He was 15 years old and was already at the Manwu level. He was quite talented and had good combat instincts. He was born into a good family, and according to the information, he worked hard. Apart from having an awkward personality, this was only a small problem. Renbochin had seen many experts with more awkward personalities than him. At the very least, there weren't many people in the Aboriginals' imperial court who were considered normal by Earthlings. Lin Chaola and Lin Yu, which one of them was normal? Lin Dong was even the leader of a cult. As for Ning Kaichin, she was also a big shot in the masochistic world. To him, this kind of chinibyu wasn't even considered child's play. I watched your competition, and it was very good. At your age, very few people can be better than you, he praised. Although Tong Lan reached Kismet Heaven at the age of 8, Shirgan reached Kismet Heaven at the age of 10, and Hong Xian could break through to Cardinal Heaven at any time when she was in her 20s, the young man in front of him was still very immature compared to the geniuses of that world. However, as a leader, he didn't mind giving some encouragement to the young man at the appropriate time. Although I'm not the best yet, I will become the best. Chao Wenji blurted out the words in his heart. His mind flashed with the last place and the other person in this competition. I like young people with drive. Ren Baqian laughed. I heard from Ren Xia that you have questions for me, he asked. Yes, there are some things that I can't find the answer to. Besides you, I don't think many people can answer them for me, Chao Wenji said. Well, I can answer 3 of your questions. He thought about it. Since Ren Xia was asking him questions, it should be related to training. He could give her a chance. Thank you, Senior. 3 questions were a little too few, but he had a lot of questions to ask. However, he also knew that this opportunity was hard to come by. In this world, are there really god-tier martial artists? Chao Wenji thought about it and still asked a question that he wanted to know the answer to. Ren Xia was looking forward to his question, but she didn't expect it to be this. She sighed and thought, you should ask me this question. What a waste of an opportunity. Yes. He nodded. Although there weren't any on Earth, the Empress would often come to Earth. Chao Wenji clenched his fists when he heard his question. This answer made him understand one thing. There were indeed many things in this world that he couldn't come into contact with. For example, everyone knew that there was such a level, but he had never heard of a godly expert who actually existed. What about the rest? How many things were there that he didn't know? How many secrets were there in this world? Second question. I heard that there are original and improved versions of this technique. What's the difference? Ren Xia didn't know whether to laugh or cry. You're asking me this question. Another opportunity wasted. The improved version is more suitable for most people. It requires less resources and can progress faster, he replied in a relaxed manner. Then, he changed his tone and said, however, there are pros and cons to everything. Just like building a tall building with a good foundation, although the improved version has various advantages, it has a huge disadvantage. That is, the foundation is insufficient, and it's more difficult to advance. If the original cultivation difficulty is 5 to 7, then the improved cultivation difficulty is 7 to 9. Chao Wenji's heart skipped a beat. It turned out that this was the difference. Fortunately, he asked this question. Otherwise, he would never have known. In fact, he already knew about this. After all, this technique had been spread on Earth for more than 20 years, and some of its flaws had long been discovered. The original version had a higher requirement for talent, while the improved version was more suitable for the general public. Therefore, although there were some flaws, its superiority was unquestionable. After asking these 2 questions, Chao Wenji kept overturning the last question he wanted to ask. What level could one reach in cultivation? The answer to this question was too far away from him. Furthermore, the other party was only at the Earth level. Perhaps when he was as strong as the other party, he would naturally know a lot of things. How could he surpass everyone? He just had to be stronger than everyone else. How could he cultivate faster? There were no shortcuts to cultivation, and he could only work harder. Questions appeared in his mind, but he overturned them one by one. Finally, a thought that had been hidden deep in his heart floated to the surface. He had never told anyone about this, but he really wanted to explore the secret behind it and didn't know if the other party would know anything. If the other party knew, based on what he had seen, the other party wouldn't harm him, right? Where did these cultivation methods come from? Asked Xiao Wenji slowly. Renbochin glanced at him and replied, I can answer this question, but do you really want to know? This is your last question. Xiao Wenji hesitated for a moment before he gritted his teeth and said, Ever since I broke through to the black level, I always have a dream. I'm in the middle of a battlefield, surrounded by humans, and facing enemies that have 8 arms or are half human and half snake creatures. There are also people with lightning wrapped around their bodies, flames burning in the sky, and ravines left by battles on the ground. Although it's a dream, it's very real. Whether it's the pain or the blood splattering on my face, it's as if I'm experiencing it personally. Xiao Wenji stared at his expression as he spoke. That dream always made him suspect that it was his previous life. Although it was too ridiculous to talk about his previous life in this scientific world, that dream was too real. But that dream was too real, and the emotions in the dream had always been entangled with him. Ever since he had this dream, he was often troubled by the emotions in the dream, such as sadness, anger, pity, and unwillingness. Therefore, he wanted to know the answer. Moreover, in the dream, humans were fighting against foreign races. Therefore, he wanted to bet on whether the person in front of him knew anything. If Renbochin knew something, as a fellow human, he shouldn't hurt him. Not only could he get the answer that had been bothering him for a long time, but there might also be other benefits. After listening to his narration, Renbochin stared at him intently, and a storm was set off in his heart. The war between humans and foreign races. Xiao Wenji looked at Renbochin's expression and was shocked. Renbochin actually knew about it. His dream wasn't entirely a dream. Ren Xia initially felt that it was strange that Xiao Wenji actually brought up his dream and asked him about it. He really didn't seem like such an irrational person. However, Ren Xiao's heart trembled when he saw their expressions. Renbochin leaned against the sofa and changed his posture while still staring at Xiao Wenji. Ren Xia, take Erhua to one side to play for a while. I think she can't sit still anymore. Ren Xia felt regretful. He wanted to continue listening, but since his uncle had spoken, he had no choice but to take Erhua to one side to play. It seemed like there was a huge secret behind this. Not only did he understand, but Xiao Wenji also understood. After Ren Xia left, Renbochin spoke again, tell me everything about your dream. Recommending a book by an excellent author, The Almighty Richest Man Reborn. Rebirth meant that all the cards in one's hand were trump cards. After rebirth, Wei Mingrang not only wanted to let his family live a good life, but he also wanted to change the fate of countless people. First, he set a small goal, such as Bookseller's Mobile Edition. Chapter 1027. Uncle, we'll take our leave first, Ren Xia said to Renbochin, thinking that she had finally escaped from her cousin's clutches. She couldn't beat her in a fight, and she still had the temperament of a child, which was really a headache. She looked at Xiao Wenji, who was still frowning as if there was still something bothering him. Although Ren Xia was curious, she knew that this wasn't the time to inquire. After the two of them left, Renbochin closed his eyes and calmed his fluctuating emotions. The 8-armed race with 8 arms, the serpent race that was half human and half snake, the thunder barbarian race that was surrounded by lightning. It was indeed that world. According to his description, the sky full of flames should be the scene that Renbochin had seen. Although he didn't see everything, he later learned from the Empress and the others that he didn't see. He didn't expect that there were people on Earth who had memories of that world. Was this reincarnation? It was really unexpected. There was actually such a thing as reincarnation. Furthermore, people could actually be reincarnated on Earth. Renbochin didn't know some of the things that she didn't say. Otherwise, he would have been more certain about this matter and would have gotten more information. Earth and that world are really strange. Renbochin muttered to himself. He was born on Earth, but he was able to transmigrate to that world. There was another him in that world, even though his family background, and experiences were completely different. That world had the same language as Earth and some similar cultures. The people of that world reincarnated on Earth. There were also dragons and Kirins, as well as Yinglong, who had turned into ashes. These two worlds seemed to have some kind of connection. There was also Hua. Renbochin and the Empress's offspring were actually born at Kismet Heaven, which had never happened before. The Empress wasn't the only one who gave birth to children at Kismet Heaven. He didn't know if there was any connection between the two worlds. There were really a lot of unsolved mysteries. The connection between the two worlds had reached a point where he couldn't ignore it. It seemed like he had to pay more attention to whether there were people like Chao Wenji on Earth. He also had to go back and check on Chao Wenji's martial arts to find out the origin and inheritance of that martial arts. Perhaps he could find out something. The next day, another major event happened in China. Some rioters, who intended to cause conflict during the Olympics, were arrested. It was said that some people had an inexplicable hatred for the country and were controlled by some countries after gaining power. However, Renbochin's heart didn't even ripple when he heard this. He already knew what the country was going to do. This group of rioters was only a small part of it. But his mind was not on this at the moment. He brought Little Flower back to Deo. Mother Empress. When Hua saw the Empress, he ran into her arms. It had been 7 days since she last saw the Queen Mother, and she missed it dearly. Acting like a mother, the Empress picked Renbochin up and put her aside. The screen is blocked. Looking at the TV series in the air, he asked faintly, "How was it? Did you get into trouble?" Honeysuckle looked aggrieved. "Queen Mother, did you say that I would only get beaten if I did something wrong?" The Empress finally turned her head to look at her. Then, she looked at Renbochin and asked, "What happened?" "I obviously didn't do anything wrong, but my father beat me up." Hua grabbed the Empress's arm and complained. "That's the Olympics." Renbochin spread his hands. She ran into the Olympic Stadium and knocked away the athletes, interrupting the competition. "It's just a boring sports competition." The Empress didn't think much of it. "It's indeed boring for you, but it's an important competition for the people of Earth. Also, Hua is too reckless." Renbochin didn't need her to understand and just reiterated. "She needs to start royal etiquette lessons. She's only 3 years old." The Empress was the main culprit for indulging Hua. She always felt that she was too young. Even though she was the one who beat her up the most. She can already learn some things at the age of 3. You and I both know that her intelligence level is far beyond that of a 3-year-old. It's just that she's been exposed to too little and has learned too little. Furthermore, she's the future Empress of Deo and even the human race when they return to that world. There are many things that she needs to bear. Renbochin and the Empress began to discuss Hua's education beyond physical movements. This premise was very important. Harmony, love, democracy, freedom, and avoidance of domestic violence. In the end, neither of them convinced the other. Hua, who was at a loss as she watched the two arguing, knew that her good days had come to an end. Royal etiquette and culture lessons had to be carried out. Also, the practice of controlling her strength had to be strengthened. As for the matter regarding Chao Wenji, he didn't mention it as it was useless to talk about it at the moment. He would talk about it when there were more discoveries in the future. The next day, Renbochin arranged for someone to look up information on Chao Wenji's martial arts. Mountain Splitting Force, and Strange Black Scroll, were martial arts that he obtained after destroying a few sects in Tianjin Basin. The names weren't outstanding, but the martial arts of that period had this style of naming. Even if it had a simple name like Liu Hequan, Renbachian wouldn't find it strange that one punch could cause the earth to crack. Rumor had it that one of the 5 human emperors had a movement technique called left and right horizontal jumping technique. It was considered one of the strongest movement techniques in the world. After making arrangements, Renbachian continued to devote himself to the 4 modernizations of Dayo. After all, this puzzle couldn't be solved in a day. The construction couldn't be stopped for even a day. Princess, please sit still. You have to maintain the bearing of a princess. Swaying your body from side to side is really detrimental to your bearing. At night, Erhua sat in a hall surrounded by 4 female officials who were in their 30s or 40s. They were all glaring at her like tigers watching their prey. Erhua looked at the crowd. At first, she thought it was a fun game, but after a few minutes, she felt as if there were ants crawling on her body and subconsciously twisted her body. Princess, if you continue to do this, we can only give you a warning punishment, one of them said. Not too far away from them was Axayenje, who was sitting ramrod straight. She was reciting the contents of the palace's etiquette while mumbling something. Zhu Hua, who was also sitting at the side, couldn't help but say, "She's still so young. Are you all humane? You too. Don't speak, sit upright, and have a calm demeanor." The female official hit her with the wooden board in her hand. The wooden board was 2 feet long and half an inch wide. On one side, there was the word warning, and on the other side, there was the word warning. The wooden board wasn't big, but it was made of a type of heartwood. It weighed 5 kilograms, had an uneven surface, and was wrapped in a layer of strange metal. It was rather painful when hit on the body. Even an Earth-level expert would get a patch of red when hit on the body with the word warning. And when hit on the body with the word warning, it was several times more painful than the other side. "I'll hit you," Zhu Hua threatened. "This is an etiquette lesson arranged by Her Highness. If you dare to make noise again, I'll hit the soles of your feet next time." Chapter 1028. Ah, ah, ah. As soon as Zhu Hua got up from the bed, she stood there with disheveled hair and a sluggish look. She was venting her anger like a young girl who had been bullied. "Why do I have to learn etiquette when the princess is learning etiquette? I might as well learn mathematics." Zhu Hua grumbled indignantly. If the freshmen who had just come into contact with calculus heard this, they would definitely welcome it. "Come, let's throw ourselves into the world of mathematics and reach the pinnacle of life together." "I'm not doing it. I might as well fight in the arena." Zhu Hua rolled her eyes and felt that fighting in the arena was more suitable for her. This time, she was not going to do it no matter what Yague said. That night. The sugar cane harvest has been pretty good these days. As a bonus, you can get 2 sugar canes a day, Renbachian said before she could speak. Zhu Hua's eyes lit up. Although the sugar cane had a layer of skin, it contained the purest sweetness that no other fruit could compare to. There was also a lot of water, and the most important thing was that it could fill one's stomach. Just thinking about it made her salivate. "Thank you, Your Highness. However, head attendant Xiong has told me many times that you don't listen to her instructions and don't follow etiquette. You have been in the academy for so many years, but your studies have always been at the bottom. Now that you have come to the palace to learn some etiquette, you can't control your temper. You don't want to stay in the academy for so many years and learn nothing besides learning how to read, right?" Renbachian said. In Dayo, Xiong, Shi, Tai, and Tong were all common surnames. Among them, Renbachian was most curious about the surname Tong. After all, pandas and polar bears weren't strong and were only slightly stronger than biting rabbits like baby asps. The ancients wouldn't use such weak creatures as their surnames or the names of their villages. After all, in the early days, surnames were usually based on the location of the village, the special minerals, and the beasts that were totem beasts. He reckoned that there were powerful beasts called bears in the outside world. Got it. Zhu Hua felt a headache when she heard Renbaqian's lecture. Go, I will get someone to send the sugar cane to you and Hua in a while. Renbaqian waved his hand. I will take my leave then. Renbaqian grinned as he watched Zhu Hua leave. This child was really easy to fool. In fact, he already knew that Zhu Hua would not be patient enough to learn etiquette. It was inevitable that he would come over to complain or resign. Although Zhu Hua was fooled by him again, Zhu Hua's treatment was getting better and better. Now, he got pastries, sugar, and sugar cane every month. When he returned to the palace, he saw that the Empress was sitting there and seemed to be in a good mood. Is there something good today? Renbaqian laughed. You can say so. Hong Xian, that lass, has finally broken through. The Water Empress said with a smile. After all, because of Hong Wu, the Empress had been paying close attention to the Hong residents. Now that Hong Xian had broken through, she also felt happy. It is indeed a good thing. Has your Majesty thought of a position for her? Renbaqian laughed. He had long since forgotten about the little conflict he had with Hong Xian. Furthermore, Hong Xian had reached the cardinal heaven level at the age of 29. She had great potential and might even reach Hong Wu's level in the future. If he could leave the 60,000 mountains, his achievements would be even greater. Great General means the Protectorate of the South, the Empress said. Oh. The General-in-Chief who supports the nation has spoken. I didn't expect it to be the Protectorate of the South. It won't be peaceful there. Not to mention the foreign races that are still being searched for, there are other dangers in the 60,000 mountains. Hong Xian's father is also under Shiwanya, right? The dangers are great, but there are also many opportunities. As long as the location of all the foreign races is confirmed and all of them are wiped out, the Protectorate of the South will be the outpost for the outside world. Renbaqian nodded. Even if she wasn't among the first batch of people to go to the outside world, the Protectorate of the South would still be stationed near the outside world in the 60,000 mountains. It would definitely be better to train there than here. Although it was dangerous now, it was child's play compared to the war that would happen in the future. It was also an opportunity to hone her skills. Hong Wu had put in a lot of effort. At her age, she should have gotten married long ago, right? Previously, she was focused on cultivation. Now that she has reached the cardinal heaven level and has reached a certain level, Your Majesty can appoint a marriage partner for her. Renbaqian had never given up on increasing the Aboriginal population. This was especially true for such a talented young expert. He should get married earlier and have more offspring. Renbaqian was already considering the Aboriginals' three-child subsidy policy to promote the increase in the population. The Empress rolled her eyes at him and said, "You are about to go berserk." Renbaqian pondered and said, "Speaking of which, Your Majesty should set an example." The Empress lazily leaned against the couch, gave him a sideways glance, and said provocatively, "Come on." Immediately, the palace guards sealed the palace with ease. Before the two of them came out, no one could go in. The Empress didn't attend morning court for many days, and everyone in the imperial court was used to it. As a result, there was a small interlude. After finding out that the palace was sealed, Hua rolled her eyes, knocked out her caretaker, Zhu Hua, with a brick, and sneaked out. It was still the same restaurant as last time. Unfortunately, others knew her identity this time. They received her warmly and sent someone to inform the palace guards. Xiange personally came to take Hua back, and she was greeted by Zhu Hua's resentful gaze. She was actually knocked out by a 3-year-old with a brick. Zhu Hua felt like dying. As for why a 3-year-old would use a brick to suffocate someone from behind, Zhu Hua could only sigh and say, "What a sin." This was what Xiange told her. Back then, she had suffocated a few people with stones in the village. Renbaqian got people to keep an eye on Chao Wenji while he was busy with various things in Deyo. Chao Wenji was accepted as an inner disciple. He could only become a core disciple after reaching the later stages of the man-will level. At present, Deyo Martial Arts Center had trained dozens of Earth Will experts, which was twice as many as the Armed Forces Command and the military combined. On one hand, it was because Deyo Martial Arts Center recruited many talented young people in the early stages. On the other hand, it was related to the martial arts manuals. As mentioned before, these original martial arts manuals had a much smaller target audience than the modified versions, and they also had a higher requirement for talent. However, the inner disciples in the martial arts center were all talented young people, so there was naturally no need to worry about this. Shaojiang Academy. Ning Chongqing looked at the 20 young scholars in front of him. Among them, 17 were men and only 3 were women. Shaojiang Academy was considered open-minded, and there weren't many women in it. For example, Wangjing Academy didn't accept female disciples at all. In the Aboriginals, due to the strength of women, women were truly equal. Many of the court officials were women, especially in the Ministry of Revenue, where there were more women than men. However, in the Yun Nation, men were still the majority. Compared to the academy, women who were talented were more valued in the sections. This time, when you go to Black Bamboo Academy, you will be representing the academy and your own future. I won't say anything unnecessary. Whether it's for the academy or for yourselves, do your best. He didn't say what they would do their best, but everyone was clear about it. Understood. Don't worry, Dean. Well, remember not to talk nonsense when you get there. Although I know that all of you know what to do, I still have to remind you. No matter when, no matter what others say or do, remember your own identity, Ning Chongqing exhorted everyone. Yes. Go back and pack your bags. We will set off tomorrow. Set a small goal first, such as 1 second. Remember, Scholar House. Chapter 1029. There were 20 students in the Shaojiang Academy, and they were generally between 20 and 25 years old. In this era, there was no 9-year compulsory education. After attending the so-called primary school, in the private school, one could only enter the academy after their ability and knowledge reached a certain standard. The standard was to enter the academy at the age of 15. Of course, there were also many students in their 30s who were still in primary school. This was mainly because even though one could enter the private school at the age of 8, not everyone could enter at this age. It was normal for one to enter the private school before the age of 20. The students heading to Lon City this time were the best in the academy, and their age was considered the most normal. This was because, in addition to the private school, many scholars would choose to travel during this period to increase their knowledge. Reading thousands of books and traveling thousands of miles wasn't just a saying. Dean, where are we going? It doesn't seem to be the way to Lon City. A student who always squinted his eyes asked Ning Chongqing during a break. In the distance, many students were paying attention to this place. You lost a bet. Ning Chongqing glanced at him and said faintly, "So, you are here to inquire about the route?" "No, I won." The young man squinted his eyes and smiled. "Dean, you said that if you are more capable than others, you must be more responsible than others. So, I took the initiative to take on this responsibility." You. Ning Chongqing was somewhat speechless. How could these words be used here? The young man in front of him was called Chao Gui, and he was one of the most outstanding students in the academy. Previously, he had traveled the entire Yun nation alone with a sword and left behind quite a reputation that was still being passed down to this day. If he had any shortcoming, it would be that he always liked to bet with others. Then, guess where we are going? Ning Chongqing said while stroking his beard. There was a questioning look in his eyes. We are going to meet up with the Salt Academy, and then head to Pingdu. Chao Gui answered without thinking. Tell me the reason. Our academy and the Salt Academy have always had a good relationship. This time, we are traveling together and can communicate with each other. We can also prepare for the confrontation with the other academies. This should be the case, regardless of the relationship between our two academies or the position of our academies. However, if we want to meet up and head to Lan City, we should meet up in Yujiang City. Our current route isn't to Yujiang City. Looking at the current route, we are going to Salt City, which was not far from the Salt Academy. Will they be waiting for us there? Since they were going to rendezvous in Salt City, they definitely wouldn't follow the normal route to Lan City. In that case, he could only head to Pingdu, where a large number of tractors and trucks could reach Lan City directly. However, Yujiang City was located on the route from Pingdu to Lan City, so it would save them a lot of time. There must be another reason why we are going to Pingdu. Chao Gui said with a smile. Continue. Ning Chongqing listened to his analysis. Although he was somewhat gratified in his heart, for it was a happy thing to have such a student in the academy. However, that hobby of his would cause him to suffer a great loss sooner or later. I can easily come up with many reasons to go to Ping City. The first was to meet up with the other academies and head to Lan City together. However, the dean hadn't mentioned it until now, so this was probably not the reason. Besides, Lan City wouldn't want us to have a heated exchange in Pingdu. The most exciting part should be left in front of everyone. The second reason is to head to the Protectorate office, where someone will escort us to Lan City. As far as I know, the road from Pingdu to Lan City is very safe. The security in Lan City is also much better than before, so it shouldn't be so troublesome. The third reason is that the dean is afraid that students like us have unrealistic thoughts, so he will bring us to Pingdu first to see how the people of Pingdu live and work in peace under the Protectorate office's rule. This will prevent us from causing trouble for the academy after we reach Lan City. The fourth reason. Ning Chongqing listened to Chao Gui's eloquent analysis without changing his expression. Chao Gui didn't know whether he had guessed correctly or not. I've already stated the 6 most probable possibilities, so can the dean dispel our doubts? Chao Gui paused after stating 6 possibilities in a row and changed the subject. Which one do you think it is? Ning Chongqing continued to test him. I don't think it's any of them. Ning Chongqing was slightly stunned. Since it wasn't any of them, why did he come up with 6 possibilities? My intuition tells me that it's none of them. Chao Gui knocked on his head. As a person who likes to bet, my intuition has always been very sharp. You will know when we get there. You can continue guessing along the way. Ning Chongqing suddenly smiled at him childishly. Thank you, Dean. Chao Gui cupped his fists at Ning Chongqing. Ning Chongqing was slightly stunned. Chao Gui gave up so easily. I bet with them, and the dean won't tell me. Chao Gui laughed heartily and turned to wave at the people behind him. Boo! Everyone booed. You brat. Ning Chongqing didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He had actually become Chao Gui's gambling tool. However, I am really curious about the reason behind it. Let's wait and see. Chao Gui bowed at Ning Chongqing before swaggering off. One day later, everyone from the Shaojiang Academy met up with the Salt Academy. Dean Yen Shu, long time no see. Ning Chongqing greeted the dean of the Shaojiang Academy. The students from the two academies also greeted each other. I, Yen Ruosui, greet the brothers of the Shaojiang Academy. These are my classmates. A rather enthusiastic young man, or rather, a teenager, greeted them and introduced them to the people from the Shaojiang Academy. Greetings. Everyone from the Shaojiang Academy cupped their fists. Their attitude wasn't perfunctory, but it wasn't very enthusiastic either. The reason was naturally because of what was mentioned above. It is my honor to be able to go to Lon City with everyone from the Shaojiang Academy this time. I might have to disturb you and listen to your wise opinions. Yen Ruosui didn't care about the other party's performance and was still extremely enthusiastic. Brother Ma, let's make a bet. Let's guess whether he can't wait to trample on us under his enthusiasm. At the back of the crowd, Chao Gui patted the shoulder of an ugly young man with small eyes and a face full of pimples. He whispered in his ear. If two people guess the same option, the bet won't work. The ugly young man's eyes flashed as he snorted. The Salt Academy was also a rather famous academy in the Yun Nation, and its style was similar to the Shaojiang Academy. The founder of the Salt Academy had learned from the Shaojiang Academy, so its style was also instilled into the Salt Academy. Coupled with other relationships, the relationship between the two academies was pretty good. However, this didn't mean that the students of the two academies would have a good relationship. The Salt Academy could be said to be a substitute for the Shaojiang Academy. For many people, regardless of whether they were students or other people, their primary goal was naturally the Shaojiang Academy, and the Salt Academy was the next best. Therefore, many students of the Salt Academy always felt that they were inferior to the Shaojiang Academy. On the surface, the Salt Dao Academy blindly followed the Shaojiang Academy's lead, but what the numerous students thought in their hearts was another matter. At the very least, there was definitely a desire to compare. That's hard to say. Chao Gui had a faint smile on his face. Why don't you guess? What's the bet? Ma Hualong asked. A drink at House Yunyan. Ping City's House Yunyan. Lon City's House Yunyan. Then it would be impolite to refuse. He must have other plans in mind. As long as he finds an opportunity, he will step on our heads to show others. I heard that the Salt Academy has a genius surnamed Yen. It should be him, right? Remember, a drink at House Yunyan. Ma Hualong giggled. Chao Gui chuckled. Then, I'll guess another possibility. After saying that, he took 3 steps forward. Brother Yen, how have you been recently? Brother Chao, I saw you just now. Seeing that you didn't have any reaction, I thought that you had forgotten about me. Yen Ruosui welcomed him with joy. I was thinking of finding an opportunity to talk to you in detail later. If it wasn't for you, I would have been in danger. I still have to thank you for saving me. You're welcome. I encountered such a thing while traveling, so I naturally couldn't sit idly by. Chao Gui turned his head and smiled at Ma Hualong, causing the latter's face to darken. He had fallen into his trap. The two of them actually knew each other. And from the looks of it, Chao Gui had even saved him before. First, set a small goal, for example, 1 second. Chapter 1030. After meeting up with the Salt Academy, it took them 3 days to reach Pingdu. The Salt Academy had fewer people than the Shaojiang Academy with only 10 people. After all, they weren't the main characters this time. The strength of the students from the Salt Academy wasn't comparable to that of the 5 academies, and sending too many students would lower the average level of the students. Along the way, Ma Hualong observed the people from the Salt Academy, especially Yen Ruosui. He wanted to find out what was hidden behind his smile. But to his disappointment, Chao Gui didn't give himself away at all. Not only him, but even the students of the Salt Road Academy admired Chao Gui quite a bit. Even the other students from the Shaojiang Academy received a lot of benefits from this admiration. If it was only one person, it could be explained, but if all 10 of them were like this? Ma Huolong didn't believe it in any case. However, there was still a long way to go to Lon City. Once there, he would be able to find out what the other party was thinking. The other party could pretend for a while, but sooner or later, he would reveal himself. Pingdu wasn't considered an important city on the map of the Yun nation. It wasn't a strategic location, nor was it a place where trade routes converged, nor was it a flourishing place. However, after the Yun nation was destroyed, Pingdu became one of the most important cities. The Protectorate of the Northeast, which was now renamed the Protectorate of the Yun nation. The Yun nation was actually the name of the country, not the region. Surprisingly, after the Yun nation was destroyed, Dayo actually named this place the Yun nation. This was beyond many people's expectations. Just like when the Qin Empire destroyed the 6 states, if the regions were divided into Zhao, Qi, and Chu regions, it would constantly remind everyone that they were a group of people who had lost their countries. And I'm the winner. In fact, only a few people knew that he wanted to change the name of this place. However, when this idea was brought to the Empress, she simply said, "The Yun nation sounds good to me. The name Yun Yun sounds familiar, so let's just call it Yun Yun." As for what they think. When the Yun nation was still around, they couldn't do anything to my army. Now that the Yun nation has fallen, what can they do? I want to remind them that under the edge of my blade, they must know their place and behave themselves. If they can't do it, I will make them do it. He had been distressed about this for a long time. The Empress always liked to decide many things according to her own preferences. For example, beheading the envoy of another country, the Empress had done this more than once. Being an envoy in Dayo meant risking one's life. Up until now, it seemed that no one had been able to end well. The envoy of Great Xia, who had lived the longest, was beheaded after he refused to surrender. This explained why the Yun nation was still called the Yun nation. Pingdu had not been important in the past, but it was now the hub of the Yun nation. It was also the end of the road from Lon City to the Yun nation. How about a bet? Guess which academy will meet first here? Chao Gui nudged the red-lipped, white-toothed young man with his shoulder. "I never gamble, and I won't gamble with you," the young man said with a cold face. "How boring would that be?" "It's good to have a little excitement in life," Chao Gui said with a smile. "Not interested." The young man quickened his pace and ignored him. The young man was one of the 3 most outstanding disciples of the Shaojiang Academy, Shui Yuanpei. Shui Yuanpei, Ma Huolong, and Chao Gui each had their own characteristics. Ma Huolong was ugly, Chao Gui was a gambler, and Shui Yuanpei was old-fashioned, stubborn, had no hobbies, didn't like women, didn't like men, didn't amass wealth, and wasn't greedy for power. He was a boring person that no one could find any flaws in. However, he was also the Academy's most handsome student. Huolong. Forget it. You still owe me a banquet at House Yunyan. Chao Gui looked at Ma Huolong and shook his head. We still don't know who will win. Ma Huolong said. Chao Gui flashed to the back of the group, put his arm around Yen Ruosui's shoulder, and asked, "Do you want to make a bet?" Yen Ruosui laughed and said, "Brother, you still like to bet with people." He still remembered that when he faced those villains, he felt that he was going to die this time. However, the trembling girl behind him made him grit his teeth and stand in front of her. "Do you want to make a bet?" He hadn't reacted when that voice sounded. "Let's bet what poison you were poisoned with just now. Look at the 3 bottles in my hand. One of them is the antidote, and the other 2 are poisons that will take effect immediately. Do you want to bet? I sprinkled the poison into the wind just now. Didn't you smell the cloying fragrance of the girls in Drunken Fragrance? This poison isn't that powerful. At most, It will make your intestines rot and you'll have to dig out your own eyes. You probably still have, let me calculate, about 5 minutes left. Of course, you can also bet that I'm lying to you. Which one do you want to bet on? Chao Gue sat on the eaves, fanning himself with one hand and holding a jar of wine in the other. There was a red lipstick mark left by some girl on his face, and he laughed wantonly at the crowd below. Yen Ruosui smiled and said, "Since brother is in the mood, I am naturally willing to accompany you. What do you want to bet on?" "You're smart." Chao Gue patted him and praised. "Let's bet on which academy we'll meet next. I'm sure that it won't be just our 2 academies that have come to Ping City." The people who were listening with interest immediately felt that it was very difficult when they heard the content of the bet. After all, it wasn't just the 5 academies this time. They didn't even know which academy would be participating. How were they supposed to guess? Let's talk about the bet first. The loser will treat everyone here to a drink. How about that? Hearing Chao Gui's words, the crowd had a good impression of him. It didn't matter even if they lost this kind of bet. Moreover, the content of the bet was also very interesting. Although there was a certain element of luck involved, it also depended on the individual's analytical ability. "Alright, brother, you can guess first." Yen Ruosui immediately said. "Since you call me brother, of course you have to go first. If anyone else wants to bet, you can also say the name you like. If any of you are wrong, then you could treat everyone together." Chao Gue called out to the others around him. "Then I won't stand on ceremony. I guess it's the drunken scripture hole." Yen Ruosui said. "I also guess it's the drunken scripture hole." Another person said with a smile. "I guess it's the Jitai Academy." A pretty girl said. "I guess it's the Leitang Academy." Everyone started guessing, but they could only come up with 3 names. The drunken scripture hall was near here, so the students were most familiar with Pingdu. Many academies would ask their students to wait in the inn when they came here to avoid trouble. The students from the drunken scripture hall were certainly not like this. The Jitai Academy was the only academy in the Yun nation that had more women. Women always liked to wander around when they came to a new place. As for the Leitang Academy, the people from the academy liked to investigate the local prices everywhere they went. The Leitang Academy was the academy that had the closest relationship with many chambers of commerce. "Brother, what are you guessing? You can't be the banker. If we don't guess correctly, we won't guess correctly, right?" Yen Ruosui said with a smile. "Why would I do that?" Chao Gue coughed softly. "I guess it's Wangjing Academy." Everyone was surprised. Even Ma Hualong, who was listening to the discussion behind them, found it strange. How could it be Wangjing Academy? "Chao Gue, it's really you. I saw you upstairs just now and thought I got the wrong person. What do you want to do about you and my sister?" A man's angry voice suddenly came from the back of the group. Everyone turned around and saw that the person was actually wearing the uniform of Wangjing Academy. They immediately understood that Chao Gue must have seen the other party upstairs and knew that the other party would definitely look for him. That was why he made such a bet. However, everyone pricked up their ears. What exactly did Chao Gue do to make the old-fashioned students from Wangjing Academy who study the classics every day disregard his sister's reputation and say such things in public? It's indeed Brother Zhu. I thought you looked like you at first glance. Chao Gue didn't feel like he was caught doing something bad at all. He put his arm around the other party's shoulder and whispered a few words into the other party's ear. "Really?" The person's angry face seemed to relax a little. The truth can't be faked, and the fake can't be real. "Don't worry." Chao Gue laughed. "Xiao Huan. Don't worry. When we return from Lawn City. If you say anything false, I'm bound to lose every bet. Humph, I hope you can do what you say. Brother Zhu, don't worry. Chao Gui pulled the other party to the side. No one knew what he said. Only a few scattered words drifted over, causing everyone's heart to itch even more. After a few words, the other party's expression softened. He nodded at him and turned to leave without paying attention to the others. Everyone, I heard that the best restaurant in Lawn City is called Shanghai Restaurant. Chao Gui turned his head and winked at everyone. Brother, we can't miss a drink. Everyone from the Salt Academy laughed. Although they had lost, they didn't mind. Instead, they felt that Chao Gui was very interesting. Moreover, everyone had heard of Chao Gui's reputation. He was one of the most talented disciples of the Shaojiang Academy. At this moment, he didn't put on any airs, and everyone liked to make friends with him. Chapter 1031. On the way to the inn, they met the students of Jitai Academy. Most of them were women dressed as men, and they were young and beautiful. When they strolled on the street in groups of 3 to 5, the students of the two academies couldn't take their eyes off them. Of course, the teams from the two academies were also the center of attention. However, the other party's attention was focused on a certain point in the team, Shui Yuanpei, who had red lips and white teeth. On the other hand, the students from the Drunken Scripture Hall, who were closest to this place, were nowhere to be seen. Stay in the inn and don't run around. Dean Yan and I will make a trip to the Protectorate headquarters, Ning Chongqing said to the group from the Shaojiang Academy after settling down at the inn. Don't worry, Dean. Chao Gui vowed. Ning Chongqing glanced at him. Chao Gui was indeed reassuring, except that he liked to gamble. If he didn't change, sooner or later, he would suffer greatly because of this. The two presidents left for more than 2 hours before returning and gathering everyone together. Our two academies are the last. We will set off for Lawn City tomorrow. So many academies are leaving together. Is he riding in that truck? Someone asked curiously. As soon as this question came out, everyone became excited. The truck hadn't been around for a long time. Most people had only heard of its name and hadn't seen it before. However, it was said that this truck was not only extremely fast, but also less bumpy. It was much more comfortable than a horse carriage. Everyone was very interested in this kind of tool that could run more than 1,000 miles in a day. Not a truck. Ning Chongqing explained. Tomorrow, we will take a steam train to Lawn City. Although he did not know what a steam train was, he still said it in an extremely calm tone, as if he already knew about it. Hearing Ning Chongqing's words, many students were astonished. Steam train. What's that? You'll know tomorrow. Now, dismissed. You can wander around nearby, but don't cause trouble. Ning Chongqing finished speaking to the crowd and dismissed the students. Dean, what is a steam train? After the students left, the two teachers who accompanied them asked curiously. How would I know? If you ask me, who should I ask? It should be something new that Zhao Prince Consort came up with. Ning Chongqing was a little helpless in the face of the question. After he left, many students began to speculate. At the same time, the students of the other academies did the same. However, none of them were very important. Just like the tractor and truck from before, it was hard to guess what they were from their names. Everyone could only look forward to tomorrow. After that, everyone strolled around the flat capital. Naturally, they would meet students from other academies, and some small stories happened along the way. When it was close to evening, many people heard a long woo sound coming from outside the city. It sounded like the roar of a fierce beast, which surprised everyone. 10 minutes ago, Zidonglai, Hua Qinghua, the officials of the protectorate, and dozens of city lords were waiting on a concrete platform outside the city. In front of the platform, there were 2 tracks paved with steel. In the past few years, Dayo had invested 100 million kilograms of steel into this project. Such a huge amount of steel was terrifying. It was enough to arm all the aboriginals, from the elderly to the children. However, this 1 million gene of steel seemed to have been thrown into a bottomless pit. Even many warlords and city commanders were secretly guessing what exactly this railway that was being built was. How could Dayo spend such a shocking amount of resources on it? It was only then that everyone realized that the railway was actually a tool, just like trucks and tractors. This made everyone even more astonished. Trucks and tractors were already amazing in everyone's hearts. It only took a day and a half for a truck to travel from Lawn City to Flat Capital. Such a speed was unimaginable to everyone. However, they still had to build something called a railway under such circumstances. What exactly would it look like? While everyone was deep in thought, someone first noticed that the ground began to tremble slightly. "It's coming, it's coming. There's something on the railway," someone said. Everyone looked over and saw a black dot appear at the end of their line of sight. Following which, the black dot became bigger and bigger. After 10 minutes, everyone gradually opened their mouths and exclaimed in surprise. They saw a 3-meter-tall, 300-meter-long monster that looked like a giant steel worm getting closer and closer. It was a complete steel monster. The front end was made of steel and was shaped like an overturned cylinder. There were 3 chimneys at the top that were emitting smoke, and there were rows of wheels at the bottom. Behind the head, there were 10 compartments with glass on the side. Each compartment was 7 to 8 meters long and was several times larger than the truck. Behind the 10 compartments were 8 black compartments. This steel monster was charging towards them with an unstoppable momentum, causing them to suck in a breath of cold air. Everyone knew that this monster wasn't a real steel monster, just like the truck and tractor. Instead, it was something new. However, it was precisely because of this that it was even more spectacular and terrifying. Woo! The monster let out a long whine, slowed down, and slowly drove past everyone. "There's someone inside!" Everyone suddenly exclaimed as they looked at the compartment that passed them. They saw a man holding a child and looking at them from a glass window. It's Xiao Prince Consort. It wasn't just Renbaqian. Zidonglai also saw Tong Xingye, who was grinning from ear to ear. Although they had only met a few times, he had left a deep impression on Renbaqian. Back then, Tong Xingye beat Qin Chuan into the artificial lake at House Yunyan. Then, he took off his pants and peed into the lake. That's too much. Renbaqian smiled at the Empress. After all, they are still a little inexperienced. The train had already traveled more than 40 meters. Fortunately, the platform was large enough. After all, this was the most important hub. In the future, many goods would be loaded onto the train from here, so the platform was specially built to be very large. Very good. The Empress nodded and praised. Well done. I want to reward them. They will be very happy. As soon as the Empress finished speaking, the 2 of them heard cheers coming from the carriage next to them. Success. Nothing went wrong. Ha, we finally succeeded. This was the second trial run of this train. The first trial run didn't reach Pingdu, and not many people knew about it. This time, it was different. A grand ceremony was held in Lawn City. Not only Renbaqian and the Empress, but many court officials also took this train to broaden their horizons. There were also many students who constantly designed, adjusted, experimented, and made modifications for this day. Now that the train had safely arrived at the Yun Nation, they could finally cheer heartily. It looks like they have received the best reward. The Empress smiled when she heard the cheers from the carriage next to her. The train slowly came to a stop. Even so, Your Majesty's reward can't be lacking. Renbochin laughed heartily and stood up. He put Lu Hua on the ground, held her hand, and walked out. It's time to go out and meet them. Before getting off, Renbochin walked through another carriage, opened the door of the third, and smiled at the many students who were still excited. Now, it's time for you to go out and receive the admiration and praise from everyone. Chapter 1032. When they opened the door, they were greeted by a burst of noise and admiration. Even though they had seen tractors, trucks, telephones, and other things, the impact of the train didn't diminish at all. The combination of huge size and steel always formed a unique sense of beauty. The mechanical parts and gears became the best decorations. Greetings, Zhao Prince Consort and Your Highness. Where's Her Majesty? Zi Donglai stepped forward and asked. At the back. Renbochin nodded at everyone. Then, he pointed at the young people who came down from behind him and said, Let me introduce to all of you the biggest contributors this time around. They are the first-year students from Black Bamboo Academy. They are the ones who turned the blueprint into reality. They made the steel behemoth like the steam train appear in the world. The first person to jump down from behind Renbochin was Tong Lan, who was dressed in white. Tong Lan was 1.7 meters tall, had a slim figure, and a delicate appearance. She had a unique temperament that was a combination of heroism, wisdom, and self-confidence. She amazed everyone the moment she got off the train. Following her were Shirgan and the other students. The oldest among them was 25 years old. Unlike the Aboriginals, who could be seen everywhere, their 7 years of learning had given them a heroic bearing that was different from barbarism. Even if they were standing in a crowd, they could be easily distinguished at a glance. Everyone got off the train and stood in a row. Renbochin let go of Lu Hua and applauded, You guys have succeeded. Well done. At your age, no one can do better than you. Following Renbochin's actions, everyone applauded. Although there was applause in this world, it wasn't a ritual like it was on Earth. However, with Zhao Prince Consort applauding in front, everyone naturally followed suit. This kind of action was easy to understand. For a moment, the atmosphere was quite enthusiastic. Renbochin looked at the excited expressions on everyone's faces. After all, apart from Shirgan and Tong Lan, everyone present was abandoned by their families a few years ago. Even they couldn't see any hope for the future. Over time, as Renbochin demonstrated all kinds of tools that changed people's lives, their treatment steadily improved. At that time, they already knew that they would receive honor and admiration one day. However, when this day really came, they felt a sense of excitement and satisfaction from the bottom of their hearts. It was like an electric current coursing through their bodies, causing them to tremble. Renbochin seemed to know what everyone was thinking. He smiled and asked, What are your thoughts? It didn't explode. We were so lucky. Du Lao Lu said. There was a period of pressure that I couldn't release. I thought I was going to ascend to heaven. What greeted him were more than 10 cold gazes and more than 20 sympathetic gazes. One had to know that this wasn't a trial. The Empress, Yague, and many of the court officials were on the train. If the train were to explode into the sky, they didn't even dare to imagine such a scene. One could imagine the pressure they were under. Fortunately, they arrived safely. You can keep such thoughts to yourself. Renbochin was so angry that he almost laughed. Do you have to be so direct? Very good, Xiaolan did well. As the Minister of the Ministry of Works, he attached more importance to the means of transportation than anyone else. Especially when his granddaughter, Tong Lan, was among them. It's not just me. In a rare moment of modesty, Tong Lan added in her heart, at most, half of the credit belongs to me. She is indeed my granddaughter. Tong Jinya laughed heartily. Of course, the others have done well. The Ministry of Works welcomes all of you. How about it? Working at the Ministry of Works will give you a chance to display your talents. As for your studies, it doesn't matter. Just come to the Ministry of Works when you have nothing to do. The Ministry of Revenue will also give you a chance to display your talents. Tu Wan put on her sunglasses and smiled at everyone after getting off the train. The Ministry of War is the home of the brave. Come to the Ministry of War and follow me. Let them play with their eggs. Qin Chuan's loud voice could be heard before he even got off the train. They still have 3.5 years to graduate. Ren Baqin glanced at the crowd and reminded them. He added in his heart, graduate from university. More than 20 officials from various ministries got off the train, and the warlords who were waiting here felt their foreheads break out in sweat. Most of these warlords were only at the man-will level, and the strongest two had just advanced to the earth-will level. In front of more than 20 Cardinal Heaven experts, there was a lot of pressure. Your Majesty. When the Empress, who was wearing a red dress and had her hair casually draped behind her, appeared, everyone immediately cupped their fists and greeted her. Mother. Hua turned around and threw himself into the Empress's arms. The Empress grabbed him by the neck and shoved him to Zhu Hua, who was following behind. The Empress nodded at everyone and walked to the front of the students. With a faint smile on her face, she praised, well done. Zhao Prince Consort didn't waste so much effort on you. I hope that you can create the future of the human race. Yes, Your Majesty. Everyone was excited. Ren Baqin put his hands behind his back, paused for a moment, and turned to look at the Empress. She actually said human race instead of Deo. Then, he smiled. After so many years, the Empress had finally begun to change. Not only him, but Tong Jinya and the other officials also understood the meaning behind her words. Let's introduce this steam train. The Empress looked at everyone with a gaze full of admiration. Most of them looked at Shurgan, and a few looked at Tong Lan. Among the students, these two were the strongest. Although strength wasn't considered in the academy, the concept of strength was already deeply rooted in everyone's bones. Many students subconsciously regarded these two as their representatives. Furthermore, they weren't just strong, but also did well in their studies and other aspects. For example, Shurgan was good at coordinating and contacting many students and other departments. As for Tong Lan, she had overhauled the steam train's blueprint dozens of times. The current steam train was designed according to Tong Lan's ideas and the collective efforts of everyone. Shurgan gently patted Tong Lan's arm. Tong Lan stepped forward, glanced at everyone, and then said to Zidong Lai and the city officials, the Empress's steam train is officially known as Laboratory Number 77. It has a total of 19 carriages, each 24.6 meters long and 3.1 meters wide. The height between the roof and the track surface is 4.47 meters, and it weighs 93,400 kilograms. The first carriage is the locomotive, and the second is a simplified version for the imperial family. The production of the carriages for the imperial family takes a year, and the dean is in charge of this. The third to sixth carriages are double-decker berths, and each carriage can carry 36 passengers. The seventh carriage is the dining carriage. The 8th to 11th carriages are passenger carriages, and each carriage can carry 80 passengers. The 12th to 19th carriages are freight carriages, 13 meters long, and each carriage can carry 120 kilograms of cargo. According to different requirements, a freight carriage can be fully loaded with passenger carriages or cargo carriages. Due to the limitations of the platform's length, the former can haul up to 18 passenger carriages, and when all the carriages are passenger carriages, it can carry up to 1,500 passengers. The maximum number of cargo carriages is 24, and the load is 2.8 million kilograms. When it's not fully loaded, the speed is 32 kilometers per hour, which is 128 kilometers per hour. When it's fully loaded, the speed is 25 kilometers per hour, which is 100 kilometers per hour. Hiss. Everyone inhaled one after another, as though they were having a toothache. They didn't know much about other things, but it could carry 1,500 people at a time. It could carry 2,800,000 kilograms of cargo at a time. How many horse carriages and ox carts were this equivalent? Or how many tractors and trucks were this equivalent? According to horse carriages, the largest horse carriage needed 5 horses to carry 20 people. When it came to transporting goods, the load of an ox cart was usually 5,000 kilograms. In other words, the load of this steel beast was equivalent to the load of 400 horses and 80 horse carriages. As for the load, it was equivalent to the load of 560 ox carts. As for the speed, it wasn't even worth comparing. Even Tong Jinya and the rest, who had heard it before, couldn't calm down when they heard it again, let alone the people who heard it for the first time. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Chapter 1033. Due to the Aboriginals' human form, the 5 seats on Earth were changed to 4. At the same time, the depth of the seats was also increased. As a result, the 118 passenger carriages on Earth could only carry 80 people. Similarly, the number of passengers in the hard sleeper carriages was also greatly reduced. Even so, the emergence of trains was a huge impact on transportation and travel in this world. With Rinpoche's promotion, trains and other means of transportation in this world would be promoted to the entire territory of Deo at a speed that was dozens of times faster than in Rinpoche's previous life. For example, there is only 1 railway track from point A to point C, and 2 railway tracks are set up at point B. In this way, the trains to and fro can cross each other at point B. This was also a method often used on Earth. Through this method, there could be up to 8 trains on the route from Lon City to Pingdu. In terms of cargo transportation alone, more than 5 million kilograms of cargo could be transported every day. In this era, it could be considered an astronomical figure. However, with the existence of tractors and trucks, the current requirement for carrying capacity wasn't that high. Therefore, Rinpoche estimated that there would be a total of 4 trains per day, with half of the passengers and half of the cargo. In other words, there would be 2 trains departing from Lon City or Pingdu every day. This carrying capacity could be said to be enough for a few years. After all, the people of the Yun Nation and the Aboriginals didn't have the habit of visiting or traveling to another area. As a result, there wouldn't be a peak traffic flow like on Earth. After all, the people coming and going were the chambers of commerce, a small number of scholars, and officials with official duties. The ordinary people of this world couldn't walk more than 50 kilometers away from their homes in their lifetime. In the next few years, when many people had gotten used to traveling by train, the number of trains could be gradually increased. The next new railway plan was to connect Pingdu to Wangjing and Lon City to the 60,000 mountains. The construction of these 2 railways would take 5 years. In this way, the transportation from the east to the central and western regions and from the south to the central and northern regions could be completed. After that, it would be from Lon City to the Protectorate of the North and the Protectorate of the Southeast. In this way, Lon City would become Deo's only transportation hub. The location of the new city would be more than 100 kilometers away from Lon City. It would only take 4 hours by train, and it would be the political center of Deo. These people. Is that the Empress? Why is the Empress here? Chao Gui stood at the back of the crowd and looked at the approaching group. When he saw who it was, his pupils shrank. Although he had never seen the Empress in person, he had seen a portrait of her. Moreover, even if he had never seen the portrait before, he could guess his identity just by looking at his posture and bearing, as well as the way Zidonglai followed behind him. Should we go back and inform the dean? A student from the Shaojiang Academy asked. What's the point of notifying him now? Let's take a look first, Chao Gui replied without turning his head. His gaze lingered on the Empress for a moment before moving on to the crowd. Is that Chao Prince Consort? What a shiny head, just like in the legends. These people seem to be spirit will experts. It was simply terrifying. In terms of high-end martial arts, the imperial court was simply too terrifying. Be it the original imperial court, the Qin nation, or the Great Xia, none of them can compare. Who are these people? She didn't look very old. What a beautiful girl. TSK, he looks so young, but his strength is actually a level higher than mine. Terrifying. City Lord Yujiang and Liang City Lord are following behind them. There's also Guzang, Zhongqing, City Lord Suan. They're all nearby city lords. It looks like they already knew that the emperor was coming. Ma Hualong pointed out a few people beside him. What do you think? Chao Gui asked softly. Since these city lords are here, the Empress shouldn't be going to other cities. It's very likely that she's really going to Lan City with us. Aren't those spirit will experts the ministers of the imperial court? Since the Empress, Zhao Prince Consort, and so many ministers are here, there must be something important that involves the entire Yun nation. After the procession was far away, Chao Gui pulled Ma Hualong along and said, let's go back. It wasn't just Chao Gui and the other students from the Shaojiang Academy who were watching this procession. There were also students from Jitai, Wangjing, Jiangling, and many other academies. No one expected that the Empress would suddenly come to Pingdu while they were gathering in Pingdu and heading to Lan City. She even brought along all the court officials. This made everyone speculate after they returned. No matter what their intentions are, it's not something we can participate in now. Our goal this time is still the same as before, to suppress the other academies in the exchange, someone said in the inn where the Jiangling Academy was staying. Only when we enter the imperial court will we have a chance to speak up. Brother Huining is right. Everyone, don't be distracted at this time, another person said. Everyone nodded. In the inn where the Wangjing Academy was staying, 5 people sat together. If we suppress the other academies, embarrass the Black Bamboo Academy, and then reject the imperial court's recruitment, I think they will look very good, a scholar said with a strange smile. That's right. Before we came, we were already prepared to sacrifice ourselves for a righteous cause. If they really fly into a rage out of humiliation and slaughter the students who are going to Lan City, then the people of the world and those who are content in their own corner will be able to see the true colors of these barbarians. Their previous conciliatory methods will become a joke. You have to know that we were invited by them. If they want to subdue the scholars and hold back their anger, then we must become the heroes of the scholars. Another scholar with a pair of reptilian eyes scanned the people in front of him and said. His eyes were filled with bone-deep hatred. If they became the heroes of the scholars, even if the imperial court of Dao wanted to do anything in the future, they would have to consider the reactions of the scholars. Since ancient times, the writers of the scholars couldn't be offended. The other 3 people remained silent and played with the wine cups in their hands. Why? Haven't the 3 of you made up your minds? Don't forget that we have studied many classics. How can we easily side with those barbarians? Brother Tu Jia, the warlord of Wenshi City, Duke Tu, was killed by those barbarians. If you had stayed in the academy, I wouldn't have said anything else. But since you are here, are you going to work for the enemy who killed your father? One of the three people immediately crushed his wine cup with an ashen face. Jitai Academy, that student from Shaojiang Academy is so handsome today. Little girl, are you moved? Along with the voice was a series of laughter and playful voices. The next morning, many academies with different thoughts left Pingdu and went to a wasteland in the north of the city under the lead of the soldiers. Look, the people from Wangjing Academy, Jiangling Academy, Baikuan Academy, and Fenghu Academy. The 5 academies are finally here. Chao Gui nudged Ma Hualong's shoulder and said, "What surprises me the most is that those old-fashioned fellows from Wangjing Academy actually came." Ma Hualong glanced around and said in bewilderment. While they were sizing up others were sizing them up too. Among them, there were only 7 students from Wangjing Academy, 15 from General Academy, 13 from Baikuan Academy, and 20 from Fenghu Academy, the same as Shaojiang Academy. In addition, there were many other academies. At a glance, all the famous academies in the Yun nation were here. In front of them, a row of buildings had appeared on a piece of flat land that was originally outside Pingdu City. The first 2-story pavilion was more than 30 meters wide, and the words, Pingdu Train Station, were written on the top. On both sides of the pavilion was a row of walls that tightly blocked the inside. What's a train? Everyone was puzzled again. They had heard of it once yesterday, and now they saw it again. Baidu search 881 Chinese network yen. No advertising words. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.